On the heels of UFC 254, we've got a great fight night card coming up this weekend, headlined by Anderson Silva taking on Uriah Hall. Matt, kicking off this card on the prelim portion at bantamweight, we have Chapo, and that's just a controversial nickname, with Miles Johns taking on Quicksand Kevin Natividad. And Matt, I was really excited about Kevin Natividad's UFC debut. It was supposed to be a short notice call-up against Brian Kelleher not that long ago. Now, Kevin Natividad last competed this past summer, taking on Kyle Estrada. It was the co-main event of a big LFA card where he picked up a huge second-round knockout. I mean, right shovel hook, knocking out Estrada. It was a great performance. It was one that really kind of won him over with a lot of fans. We're talking about two guys coming from the LFA ranks. You'll recognize Miles Johns as the former bantamweight champ of that organization. And I mean, to a point, he was on a 13-fight win streak until his last time out against Miguel Bautista. Both of these guys very well-rounded. I mean, for Kevin Natividad, he's got bombs in his hands. He throws a lot of power, really wide stance, coupled with really good wrestling. So you don't really have to worry too badly about him getting taken down. Whereas Miles Johns, also very well-rounded. He can let it go with the hands, mainly known for his wrestling, has good ground and pound, really good wrestling defense as well. The trouble for me in this fight, I look at it, and there's a lot of issues that I have with either guy, which is really tough to try and be critical. And what do I know behind a computer screen? All I will say is that for Miles Johns, picked up a big unanimous decision win over Richie Santiago to earn his shot in the UFC Off Contender Series. He beats Cole Smith, who was coming in. I mean, Cole Smith is a mammoth of a man if he was Slender Man. I mean, he's really thin, he's really tall, Canadian. They were fighting at home, or for him, it was a home game at the Rogers Arena in British Columbia. Miles Johns eked out a split decision win. I know he had Cole Smith hurt at one point, but the first round, Smith had his back for most of it. The second round was really close. The third round, Johns won it. It was really interesting, though, in that fight, Saif Saud, after the first round, said, Miles, man, you got to put it on. I mean, you're giving up your back, you're giving up position, you have to be more active. The second round was pretty well more the same, with Saud kind of yelling, hey, you got to get active, you got to start doing something. In that third round, in the last 30 seconds, Saif Saud was yelling at Miles Johns to really get it done. Johns picked up the split decision, like I said. Voters and MMA media members on MMA Decisions were split on that one as far as the winner. So that tells you how he made out against Cole Smith. Then he fights Miguel Bautista. Very pro Miguel Bautista show here between the two of us. Bautista knocked his head completely off and finished him in that fight. So Miles Johns coming back from his first pro loss. He seems pretty chipper. Our friend JHK MMA had a good interview with him with the South China Morning Post. So that's what you have for Miles Johns. Fortis MMA, you have a great gym. I mean, think of who trains there in the lower weight class. Carlos Diego Fajea is one that I can think of. Kevin Natividad coming out of Arizona Combat Sports. The guys from Hawaii. We've had a lot of great Hawaiians in the UFC recently, like Kai Kamaka III, who Kevin Natividad beat when he was an amateur. So Kevin Natividad, he went 13-1 as an amateur, 9-1 as a pro so far. He does have that 9-second knockout loss to a guy that was 3-2 3 years ago. I don't care. I like this fight. They match up very well on paper. I think it should be a fun one, Matt. I've talked for 3.5 minutes. It's your turn. But this is an interesting fight.
So for 3 of these 3.5 minutes, it was just a lot of negatives about Miles John. But I do think he's the far better wrestler out of these two. And Kevin Natividad, it's not like he's this unhittable figure. If you go back and watch his fights, he is really susceptible to getting hit with right hands down the middle. He's got sort of a Justin Gaethje style where he does bring his hands up and just kind of shell for his defense. And not saying this is the fight that it's really going to cost him, but when you do start to move up those ranks, if you do want to fight, let's say, I don't know, Corey Sandhagen in the future, a guy like that is going to find the holes in your defense and go to the body and then mix it up upstairs. So for Natividad, that might get you some wins early on in the UFC, but let's say he does get the win over Miles Johns. I don't think that's going to be a style that's really going to see a lot of success further down into the future. But for Johns, I do think the wrestling is going to be the key to this fight, and he really is going to have to mix it up against the cage as well. He's a guy who can't go out there and just dominate you with his kickboxing or this wrestling alone, but if he is able to really get you thinking about the striking ranges in the fight, it'll open up his wrestling as it continues. And cardio-wise, it will be interesting because it's not like Kevin Natividad is this cardio king by any means. He does carry his power later on into the fight because a lot of power punchers, you know, you talk about how dangerous they are for that first round and a half. Natividad does carry that power a little bit later than most do. Sort of reminds me a little bit of a Jeremy Stevens where, yes, they can have that higher output, but the power is going to stay late. Miles Johns is going to have to go for the takedown. It's really going to come down to, can Natividad get up off the ground if Johns is able to go for those takedowns and really implement his game that way? So To me, if you do simplify this fight, it comes down to, can Johns take down and hold down Natividad? I think he will be able to for at least 2 times in this fight, because when you think about it, Johns only needs to take down twice in this fight, and I think he will be able to get it.
Yeah, I like Kevin Natividad's wrestling, his wrestling defense, and both his offensive pressure as well. The other thing, too, and it's really interesting to note, and I kind of set it up earlier, but didn't delve too far into it. So, for Miles Johns so far in the UFC, we have to actually bring these numbers up. So, in terms of total significant strikes over Richie Santiago, he went 73 of 128, 0% of the legs, 90% of the head, 10% of the body. Again, he has that great wrestling. If he's pouring down the top pressure, you're landing to the guy's head 90% of the time. Then he took on Cole Smith. The fight took place all over the canvas in the 3rd round. It was standing for the most part. He went 31 of 65 for significant strikes, 93% to the head, 7% to the body, 0% to the legs. Against, again, Mario Bautista. He lost that fight in impressive fashion in the 2nd round. He went 13 of 44 for significant strikes, 100% to the head. This guy doesn't have a recorded significant strike to the legs in the 3 fights that have been recorded. 1 on Contender Series, 2 in the UFC. I don't like that, and here's why. Kevin Natividad has a really wide stance where he holds heavy on his front leg. Not like Nate Diaz. You'll have to see it and watch it. I mean, it's kind of like Wonder Boy is a wide stance. A lot of karate fighters can go wide stance. Kevin Natividad's wide stance, heavy with his hands, and his legs are built like Devin Clark's legs, shrunken down. Like, he has huge legs, and Kevin Natividad gets kicked. Kyle Estrada did it. Michael Chiesa was on the call, and he kept saying, hey, Kevin Natividad said it himself. My opponents kick me to legs, and he just kind of deals with it. That's not good, because later on in your career, you're going to end up like a Jose Aldo. Name your fighter that gets kicked in the legs and then can't kick anymore. I'm waiting. You tell me. There's all kinds of them. Uriah Faber, sure. In this fight, Kevin Natividad, unless Miles Johns totally changes up his game plan, which I don't anticipate him doing, I think Kevin Natividad has more than a shot in this one. And here's where this kind of surprised me. In this fight over on Tapology, 680 total votes, 69% going with Miles Johns, 87% predicting him to win by decision. If you have a look at the odds map, Miles Johns is the favorite, open minus 205. He's now at a minus 186 on best fight odds. If you look at Natividad, open plus 175. He's now at a plus 154 clip. I like the underdog in this fight. I know I set the entire video up that way.
I was going to say, you didn't say a positive about Miles Johns.
I think Miles Johns, I mean, like I said to start, he has really good wrestling. He has decent combinations. But apart from that, I mean, it's pretty basic. Again, the guy's a former LFA champ. He's done more in his life than I'll ever do. But in this fight, I do like Natividad. I like him as the underdog. Matt, I went 10-1 last weekend with the draw. Matt, you went 11-1. So who knows? Hey, but also look at the total year predictions. I'm going with Kevin Natividad.
I think Miles Johns has the wrestling, and the wrestling's really what's going to bring him the win in this. If he just needs a few takedowns, I do think his top control and his pressure is quite a bit better than Natividad's ability to escape off the bottom. So I do think Miles Johns is going to be able to wrestle his way to a victory.
Matt going with Johns. I'm going with Natividad. I'm really looking forward to this card, Matt. We have some interesting matchups. You got Andre Fili taking on Bryce Mitchell in your co-main event. Yes, that's right. In our main event, you have Anderson Silva, the retirement fight at age 45, taking on Uriah Hall. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight at women's flyweight. We have cast iron Courtney Casey representing Fight Ready MMA in Arizona, taking on Zombie Girl, Priscila Cachoeira. And Matt, for Priscila Cachoeira, holy smokes, what a trial by fire to start off your UFC career. So she gets Valentina Shevchenko in her debut, and I remember before that fight, they were billing Priscila Cachoeira as this wild knockout artist from Brazil. Great striking, really lighting it up on the regional scene. I've never seen such a single-handed beatdown, I don't think, in my entire life. Valentina Shevchenko mopped the floor with poor Priscila. So then they think, all right, seeding-wise, where does she match up? They give her Molly McCann, she loses that fight. Then she takes on Luana Carolina, and she loses that fight. All right, so Priscila Cachoeira, maybe not in the top end of the women's flyweights. Well, that's fine. Then she fights Shanna Dobson. You know, the world beater Shanna Dobson that mopped the floor with Maria Agapova in her last time out. Well, Priscila Cachoeira goes out there and in the first round knocks out Shanna Dobson. It was insane. There was an outpouring of emotion from Priscila Cachoeira. It was a wild moment. It really was. So she gets another opportunity out here against cast iron Courtney Casey. You might look at that record of Courtney Casey and go, hey, that's kind of like Randa Marco. She's 9-8, pretty salty. She's probably not all that good. If you don't know Courtney Casey, you might think, oh, she's garbage. She's not garbage. She's very good. she's had a run in the UFC similar to the Tekashi 6ix9ine song Billy. Whole squad's full of effing killers. I'm a killer too. And she's taken on some really tough names, Matt. I mean, Courtney Casey has fought Jessica Aguilar, Randa Marcos. Hey, name drop. But her losses. Joanne Calderwood, Siohei Ham. She lost to Pearl Gonzalez on the regional scene. Lost to Claudia Gadea. Lost to Felice Herrig. Lost to Michelle Watterson. Lost to Calvia. Lost to Jillian Robertson. Courtney Casey's faced some pretty damn good fighters at 15 and at 25. Maybe she hasn't won them all. I mean, she beat Jag. She beat Angela Hill. She beat Mara Romero Barella. No longer in the UFC. But Courtney Casey is one of those fighters where every time out, I almost now expect to see a different wrinkle in Courtney Casey's game. She goes out and fights Mara Romero Barella, where it's like, hey, Romero Barella, if we're boiling this down to the two simplest things, Mara Romero Barella is a grappler, Courtney Casey's a striker. And then Courtney Casey goes out and submits Mara Romero Barella and surprises poor old Craig. And then I picked her to beat Jillian Robertson. I looked like a fool. But all in all, this fight, I mean, Courtney Casey moves up in weight. She was a bigger strawweight. She still typically has an advantage at 25. Against Cachoeira, they match up fairly similar. I'd like to see them on weigh-in day to see who's actually the taller of the two and to eliminate my number that's in front of me. But overall, it's a very interesting fight. To me, just based off of what we've seen from Courtney Casey, a much more well-rounded fighter. Cachoeira, though, definitely does have that power. We saw it in the last fight out there. She's kind of as advertised from before the Shevchenko fight. Kind of reborn, if you will, coming out of a great gym down in Brazil, Pahana, Vale Tudo. I'm looking forward to this fight because, again, it's another seeding fight for 25. What do you make of this one?
So I am really looking forward to this. I think it's a fun fight, but I have no idea what we're going to get from it. And it's not because there's a lot of unknowns surrounding either athlete. I know what I'm going to get from Courtney Casey. She's going to throw kicks at range. She can mix in her takedown. She has decent jiu-jitsu. And I know what I'm going to get from Cachoeira, like you had mentioned. She's got really big power. She has good jiu-jitsu. She's on top. If she's on bottom position, much different story. But I do think a lot of her story does come down to the Valentina fight because that's what most people know her from. She's the, well, recipient of one of the worst beatings in MMA history. Courtney Casey is this really weird example of when you fight the highest level of fighters, the Angela Hills, the Felice Herrigs, you just kind of fight them all to a split decision. And it's not that you look amazing or you look terrible. It's just Courtney Casey always does the same thing. Very steady output. She doesn't have her ramp it up or really, you know, her cardio never fades as the fight goes on. Very steady. She's got kind of a mean streak to her where she will swear at her opponent and kind of, you know, get Diaz-esque, but it's not something that you really ever see coming, and then all of a sudden Courtney Casey's flipping off her opponent and you're like, it's one of these fights. So I do think Priscila can catch Courtney Casey on the feet, and also Courtney Casey has to win this fight. I don't think the UFC is going to keep a 9-9 fighter on their roster. I know they had kept Kaylin Curran around after
Rachel Ostovich.
Yeah, exactly. There's been an example, or a few of them at least, of fighters with negative
Amanda
records.
Bobby Cooper.
Again, but that's not really a group that you want to be, you know, associated with. I think Courtney Casey has all the tools to get it done, but I don't like her being as big of a favorite as she is. Because Courtney Casey, and not to steal your thunder, but Courtney Casey being a 2-1 favorite, she's not really a finishing threat. It's not like her jiu-jitsu is at such a level where if the fight's on the ground, she can win by submission, or she has such good kicks and such good boxing on the outside that if she catches you, she can put you down. She's very below average power, I would say. She is a good striker, and she can mix it up on the feet, but it's not like she's going out there putting people down with head kicks. For Priscila, if she can use her physical size, because she is still the bigger fighter out of the two. Casey was a bigger strawweight moving up to flyweight, but I do still think that Priscilla is going to have the size and physicality advantage over her. And if she can really implement her wrestling and get on top of Courtney Casey, I think we can see a really interesting fight from the underdog.
And the thing that I like, and you kind of touched on it, and so did I earlier, so I'm not trying to pump my tires, but you're going to see in these Fight Night Picks videos a little bit inside of baseball. If this is the first time joining Fight Night Picks, A, we appreciate it. Toss the like and the sub. We don't normally say that, but B, we're making a lot of changes to Fight Night Picks. So you're going to see next to us over there, the screens are going to be switching up. You're going to have stats. You're going to have different metrics that are going to pop up. And one of the things is that Priscila Cachoeira, her striking differential, that's total significant strikes and the averages of them per fight. Hers is a negative 4.09. You're not going to find a worse negative so far in somebody's UFC career. But it's so bogged down by those first 3 fights. And then her last time out, she knocks out Shanna Dobson. So there is that. For Courtney Casey, she's efficient. She's very jack-of-all-trades-esque in her approach. And again, like you said, I don't like the odds here. Courtney Casey open a -250 favorite. She's now around a -233 over on best fight odds. For Priscila Cachoeira, opens up a +210. She's now a +187. If we have a look over on Tapology, total votes, 735. 79% of voters going with Courtney Casey. 83% saying she's going to win by decision. That's definitely the safe pick, and I think I'll go with the safe pick as well, just due to the fact that you have the much more well-rounded fighter. Priscila Cachoeira, though, was in that kill or be cut type of scenario in her last fight out. She killed. So for Courtney Casey, does she go out there like an absolute world beater? No, I don't expect that. That would deviate from the median. This is a fighter that had a fight that was very controversial against the Michelle Waterson, where she lost by split decision. A lot of people, and I say a lot of people, thought that Casey won that. I think she definitely has the right blueprint to go out there and beat Cachoeira. And if she's as well-rounded as she can be and throws a decent amount of volume, I think she can get the win here.
I really can't disagree with that. I think Courtney Casey has all the skills to get the victory. I think she's a better wrestler out of the two, so she will be able to avoid a lot of the ground exchanges. I think at range, she should be able to pick up points as the fight goes on. And again, her output doesn't really shift. She's just very steady across the fight. So as long as she's able to do that for a full 15 minutes, she'll be able to get the decision win.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have Courtney Casey to get the win. Really sneaky card and a lot of fights that are going to fly under the radar. Our main event between Anderson Silva, the retirement fight, taking on Uriah Hall, one of my all-time favorites. I'm looking forward to this card. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Bit of a head scratcher at 205 pounds because we have Dustin Jacoby, and if you're a UFC fan from back in the day, and I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years ago, you'd recognize Dustin Jacoby. He's got a couple of fights. Neither one of them wins, but he did compete with the UFC. If you're a Bellator fan as well, he took on King Mo and a really tough out in John Salter after that, UFC vet. This guy's a kickboxing wizard. I mean, go back and have a look at Dustin Jacoby's record. I'll name off some of the guys. Simon Marcus, Canadian, fought him twice in a row. Wayne Barrett, Carl Roberson, that you know in the UFC and love. Alex Pereira. I mean, Israel Adesanya fans know Alex Pereira. It's all Joe Rogan talks about when he talks to Adesanya. But Dustin Jacoby has that kickboxing acumen coming out of a really good gym in Factory X Muay Thai. Oh boy. And I mean, we can go on and on about Factory X. You're going to have another fighter from that gym in Alex Hernandez also on this card. But for Dustin Jacoby, took a lot of time off between his third to last fight against John Salter back in January of 2015 and his fight against Cody East with SCL. That was in June of 2019. So about 4 years off, or just over 4 years off between those fights. He beats the man, Cody East. I mean, a guy that was in the UFC for a brief stint at heavyweight. Bumps back down to light heavyweight, comes in on Contender Series this past summer. It was a really good feel-good story. He beat the brakes off of Ty Flores in the first 2 rounds. In the third round, a little closer. I mean, majority of the judges or people scoring it out there, the fans, the media members, 30-26s, some 29-26s, but Dustin Jacoby ran away with that fight and a contract, taking on El Blanco, Justin Ledet, former guest of Fight Night Picks when we used to have interviews on the channel, and maybe we'll have them once again. But Justin Ledet had so much success at heavyweight, undefeated, coming into the UFC, picking up big wins, finishing guys, Juicy Boy, Chase Sherman in his debut. Justin Ledet looked great. Why can't I have that Justin Ledet every weekend? I don't know, but he moved down from heavyweight to light heavyweight. That's when we interviewed him for this channel. It was before his fight with Johnny Walker, before he became a highlight reel in the negative sense. And he's had fights that just make me scratch my head. Like, I look at Justin Ledet, he loses to Rakic, he loses to Walker, he loses to Kammer. And man, that Kammer fight just took the wind out of those Justin Ledet sails. If there was still any wind left, now it's just a dead water pond at this point.
Exactly, because you can lose to Rakic. It's no big deal. Now, yes, he didn't just lose to Rakic. Rakic beat him about as badly as you can beat another person in an MMA fight, but still, losing to a guy like Alexander Rakic, there's no shame in that. Now, Johnny Walker, again, you don't really know what you're going to get. He's fairly volatile. He's either going to knock you out in the craziest way you've ever seen, or you're probably going to do the same thing to him. He was on the losing side of that. But in the Kammer fight, we actually got to see Justin Ledet for an extended period of time at a range which he should be comfortable in, because that fight primarily took place on the feet at boxing range. And Justin Ledet, you always hear about how good his boxing is, how crisp his hands are. And then you watch him and you're like, okay, he's got a good jab for a big guy. And at heavyweight, I felt like he was quite a bit faster than some of the people who he was fighting. He was able to use that speed to his advantage, whereas at light heavyweight, he has the hand speed of a fast heavyweight, but being a fast heavyweight down at 205, you're just you're another one of the guys at this point. And it's not like his wrestling is at that high of a level where he can chuck guys off of him, keep it on the feet, and really box their face in, hit them with the jab. He has decent jiu-jitsu, but we see him off his back a little bit too much for my liking. He doesn't really explode to try to get up to his feet as much as kind of hold, sort of stall for the rep to try to get him up. He will attack for different submissions, but it's not like there's that much of a threat behind tons of them. For Dustin Jacoby, if he does invest in the leg kick, again, spending that much time over in kickboxing against a guy who is really heavy on his front leg, like just Ledet with his boxing style, it's going to be really important in this fight. You can get rid of some of that movement of Ledet because, again, I know it sounds like I'm being really hard on Justin Ledet, but his footwork is one of the better parts of his game. He is good with lateral movement side to side. So if Jacoby can get after those legs early on in the fight, really invest in that early, I think it'll pay a huge dividend as the fight goes on. Because with Ledet, and especially at 205, he looks like he cuts a fair amount of weight to make this weight class, and I do think it drains him to a certain degree. So I think as the fight progresses, he will start to fade.
And I mean, I remember it. We could clip it in here too. The fact that Justin Ledet talked about it, moving down to fight Rakic. It was just the fact of, hey, I just needed to diet and eat clean, and I could make the weight fairly easily. So I don't really know. But the thing is, it's almost like a sluggish performance at 205 versus at 265. We were going through water. Now at 205, we're going through mud, and it's just not really working out for him, which is it's disappointing because people are going to rag on Justin Ledet. I mean, I'm not here to rag on him. I actually don't mind his fight style. At 265, it was a lot of fun. When he was winning, it was fun. 3 losses in a row, not fun. Not fun. Not fun for Ledet. Not fun for Uriah. Not fun for the fight fans. I will say, though, matchmaking-wise, this fight does make a lot of sense because for Dustin Jacoby, it's enough to get a win over Cody East at heavyweight, so be it. It's enough to beat Ty Flores, that's cool. Justin Ledet's kind of that guy, all right, we gauge him here. If you beat Justin Ledet, now you're going to be fighting the 25 to 30 guys. Like, you know, a guy who's been injured, been away for a long time. Maybe we give Dustin Jacoby like a Tyson Pedro next. Maybe we give him somebody in that tier. Whereas if Justin Ledet beats Dustin Jacoby, all right, well, he's where we thought he was. He's maybe not an upper tier guy. No. Maybe we give him somebody that's even below that. Like, I don't even know a name that you could come up with off the top of your head. But there's guys out there in that tier. We're talking like Freight Train Hamilton, Christian Colombo type, back at heavyweight. That's for the hardcores. I look at this fight, though, and the problem that I have with it is the odds. I mean, Dustin Jacoby, I don't get him being as big of a favorite as he is now.
That's fair.
Now, having said that, Dustin Jacoby opened to minus 170. He's now at a minus 310. You sneaky dogs, you got him early. And that is what it is. So at 310, I don't like the price there. For Justin Ledet, open to plus 145. He's now at a plus 245. If we look at the total votes on Tapology, 726 votes to this point. 85% going Jacoby. 57% predicting him to win by knockout. I have Dustin Jacoby for sure. I wish I got him at the odds earlier on because now the value's gone. It's zapped unless somebody throws a big chunk of change at Justin Ledet. And if you feel like it, maybe just watch the Chase Sherman fight and throw everything we've said and all your other thoughts out the window.
Don't do that,
just watch that Chase Sherman fight. But again, I like Dustin Jacoby in this fight. Much more well-rounded. Again, if he can really start to mix it up and incorporate those kicks early, I think Jacoby should be able to get the win. Hopefully he doesn't have Krause in his corner. Hopefully it's just Mark Montoya. But apart from that, I'm looking forward to this one, going with Dustin Jacoby.
Yeah, if Justin Ledet was a better wrestler, it'd be a lot easier to side with him, because if he does start to get in trouble on the feet, and if the leg kicks are affecting him, and if the kickboxing of Jacoby is starting to get Justin Ledet, he doesn't really have the ability to just change at what range the fight's going to take place in. So I do think Jacoby, as long as he can get off to a good start, really discourage Justin Ledet early on, he should be able to pick up a win, no problem.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We're both going with Dustin Jacoby to get the win. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the predictions for this card. We got some good fights in the main event. Uriah Hall taking on Anderson Silva. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. This fight is a strange bucket of muscles. At 170 pounds, we have Havoc Cole Williams taking on Jason Witt, the Vanilla Gorilla. Matt, for Jason Witt, he made a short notice UFC debut against Takashi Sato back 3 months ago, replacing Ramiz Brahimaj, and I cannot stress how short a notice that fight was. Now, another guy representing Glory Fitness and MMA. The gym's taken the world by storm, but for Jason Witt, his first time out, gets knocked out by Sato very quickly. Now, does that give you pause? Do you worry about that so much in this fight? Not so much. I mean, Cole Williams, his first time out, took on Claudio Silva. Matt, Claudio Silva didn't look good against Glory Fitness and MMA's own James Krause not that long ago. But for Cole Williams, the kid got mopped. And I say the kid, he was 35 years old going into that fight. He's 36 right now. Let me take you through the weird journey that is Cole Williams' last 5 fights. 5 fights ago, he takes on Devoneer Jackson, who was 1-1 5 years and 9 months ago. Then he takes on John Kennedy, who was 6-16 5 years and 2 months ago. Takes on John Poppy, the old Poppy, 8-4 3 years 5 months ago. Beats him. Then he takes on, great dance move, right? Charlie Brown.
Not bad.
And that was 2 years and a month ago, and the Claudio Silva fight was over a year ago. Hopefully you like the dance moves. Wah, 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 wah. Charlie Brown. For Cole Williams, he's a well-rounded fighter. At the beginning of his career, pretty good puncher. He was quick, diminishing hand speed as he's gotten older. His cardio hasn't been all that great. And at 170 pounds, this is a guy that had fought at 170 to kind of kick off the career, had some fights at 185 and some catch weights, came in against Claudio Silva, had travel issues, and weighed in 176 pounds. That's a bad look. And I mean, this guy's 36 years old. I don't want to sound overly negative, so let me kind of stop right here and give a little bit of pause. Because the guy's 36. It's awesome that he made it to the UFC. Didn't give a good account of himself the first time out. He missed weight. There's a lot of negative around poor Cole Williams coming in. So A, kudos to you. You made it to the UFC. I will never do that. I'm just a skinny guy behind a computer. But B, this guy's career has been going downhill. And I mean, it's just one loss, so be it. I mean, he was 11-1 coming in. Jason Witt, really active. And here's the issue. Since 2017, Cole Williams has had 3 fights. 2 of them wins, 1 of them losses. For Jason Witt, he's fought 12 times. And he's fought varying levels of competition. I know his win before he got into the UFC was over a guy that looks just like a fighting Luke Thomas and Zach Busha. You have to go look up Zach Busha now.
It's uncanny.
I dare you. So just pause this here and then go look at it. But Jason Witt, he's known primarily for his wrestling, his ground and pound, and his hands are all right. He's not going to wow you with combinations. It's going to be more power punches than anything. But in this fight, again, I opened it up. It's a weird bucket of muscles. This is just such a weird fight to even happen in the UFC. This is a fight that you'd expect to see on like a regional promotion with 3 fights on a main card that are pro fights, with the rest of the 25 fights being amateur fights. This is the appetizer, the sampler, if you will, going into a card like that. But oh wait, scratch the record. This is on a UFC card. So A, it's a bit of a tough look there. And it's tough to try and even predict it, but what do you expect here, man?
So for Cole Williams at 36, not every athlete's like LeBron James who can just age like a fine wine, where it doesn't really matter what age you're at, you're
Well,
still
that's because he
top of
drinks
your
a lot
game.
of wine.
That is true, but also one of the greatest athletes ever. Cole Williams, unfortunately, is not in that same category as LeBron, but he is a fighter who you're starting to see age creep up on him, and at 36 being this young and at least your UFC career is never a great sign. And let's be honest, being 36 in a division like 170, that's when you're starting to get a little bit older, because it's not like you're at heavyweight where, you know, you could be in your prime at age 41 before you start to kind of age yourself out. Welterweight, lightweight, really anything down from welterweight. Once you start hitting 33, it's like, okay, your prime's starting to get over. Let's start wrapping this thing up. But Williams has decent hand speed. He's got all right cardio, but I do think the wrestling attack of Jason Witt is really going to stress the cardio of Cole Williams. I don't think Witt is the submission threat by any means that Claudio Silva is on the mat, because, again, we know Claudio Silva...
one of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in MMA.
Exactly. He's not a guy who you think of immediately when you do think of the best kind of ground guys or jiu-jitsu players in MMA, but really, when he gets anyone to the ground, they are in a whole ton of trouble. So I wouldn't really take too much and think that Jason Witt's just going to go out there and really dominate Cole Williams on the mat. I do think he's going to get a lot of control time in this fight, because the wrestling style, like I had said, if he gets to Cole Williams early on, the problem's just going to keep on getting worse, and that effect's just going to snowball as the fight goes on, because Jason Witt, if he can get that first takedown, he can get the second, third, and fourth even easier after that. And I do think the control time is really going to add up. I don't think this is going to be a fight of the night by any stretch, but I just think when you look at what Jason Witt does well, what does he have? He has good cardio, and he's got really good wrestling. Cole Williams, his cardio is, starting to fade. He's getting a little bit older, and he's not a great athlete, so I don't think he'll be able to keep Jason Witt off of him.
I mean, he's a long striker. If there's anything to look at from Cole Williams' standpoint, he's a long striker, and he throws with a little bit of whip on the end of his shots, but I don't expect Jason Witt to stay in range. Now, it was an issue against Takashi Sato, but the last time I checked, Takashi Sato is actually a really explosive athlete that you have to actually watch out for at 170. Might be a bit of a shocker. If I look at the total votes on this one, 667 over on Tapology, 72% going Witt, 84% predicting him to win by decision. If we look at the odds, they're actually incredibly close. Jason Witt opened an underdog, plus 125. He's now at a minus 143. Cole Williams opened minus 145, now at a plus 117 average on best fight odds. That really surprises me. I expect Jason Witt to win this fight. Honestly, I expect him to get a win by finish. I'm going TKO ground and pound round 2, maybe round 3. I don't see this one going to a decision. I have Jason Witt in this fight overwhelmingly. I'm very surprised by the odds. If Cole Williams wins, it would be a huge shock to me. Kudos to you. I mean, I think that'd be one that you retire on. Hey, I won in the UFC. I was very wishy-washy, and I won in the UFC. That's pretty cool. A guy that's repping, I know they might say he's coming out of Wisconsin. A guy originally from Dubuque, Iowa. I've been there before. So shout out to Dubuque and all you fine people in Iowa. But yeah, I have Jason Witt in this one.
It's a real clash of styles, and really the whole fight does play into Jason Witt's strength. I do think the wrestling's going to be a little bit overwhelming for Cole Williams in this one. You should be able to get it done.
Matt, we both have Jason Witt to get the win in a weird fight to be on a UFC card. I'm really looking forward to this, though, because we have a lot of under-the-radar fights. Your co-main event, Bryce Mitchell taking on Andre Fili. Looking forward to that. Great main event with Anderson Silva taking on Uriah Hall. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Really interesting fight at middleweight. And yes, I said middleweight. We have the hammer Jack Marshman, Wales' own, taking on Tarzan. I mean, just cue up the Baltimore song. Sean Strickland. Matt, this fight's interesting for a whole lot of different reasons. So let's dive into a topic that I bet will get talked about on Fight Week, but maybe not enough. Sean Strickland's been out since 2018. His last win, a knockout over Nordin Taleb in the one and only card that Fight Night Picks covered as Fight Night Picks, and I was the only Fight Night Picks at the time, UFC Moncton. He beat Nordin Taleb quite badly, and that was coming off of a really bad loss against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, one of Matt's favorites. One of the wildest spinning wheel kick knockouts you're ever going to see. So for Sean Strickland to pick up a big win over Taleb, very telling. I mean, Strickland, all you have to do, look at the record. Look at the quality of opponents that he's taken on, too. I mean, he was king of the cage guy for the longest time. Fought Tom Breeze, fought Kamaru Usman, fought Courtney McGee, and then the Zaleski dos Santos fight. So for Sean Strickland, really getting things done, and I mean, he's faced that level. You're going to lose to Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos. You're going to lose to Kamaru Usman. It's going to happen. For Jack Marshman, one of the lower output guys in the UFC, not known for his takedowns at all so far in his UFC tenure. Former paratrooper, they love to mention that. Got himself in a little bit of hot water taking a fight when he wasn't supposed to. Wasn't really cleared by the paratroopers division. I don't know enough about it. But I will say that he did get himself in hot water at one point in his career for taking a fight when he wasn't supposed to. But this guy's incredibly tough, incredibly durable, and he's got sneaky power, Matt.
He does. And Jack Marshman, a guy who I saw fight live in the second UFC fight I had ever seen live. He had fought Thiago Santos live in Halifax, and he made a pretty good account of himself. Yeah, he got beat up the first part of the fight, but he did drop Thiago in that, so he has that. That's something you can tell your grandkids. I dropped Thiago Santos in a fight. I wouldn't tell them how the fight ended, because he does get wheel kicked in the second round, but he at least did have a few good moments in that fight. Jack Marshman is a really weird story because he's in that weird tweener club where you don't have a crazy high output, but you don't really have the power to just rely on your one-shot and pot-shot people, whereas Sean Strickland, if he stands at range, he's got a lot of those kind of probing tools. And Sean Strickland, he did sort of the Alexander Volkov. He's like, hey, I'm tall and thin. What if I just gain more weight? It might work. And for Alexander Volkov, we saw that add a lot more pop to his shots, like we saw in the Walt Harris fight. If Sean Strickland did add a lot more power as he moved up to 185, I think he'd be a real problem.
So, Matt, this picture that we have on the right-hand side of Sean Strickland, that's an old picture from when he was at 170. I'm going to queue up right now a picture of Sean Strickland at 185 from his Instagrams with Johnny Walker. And I mean, holy f***, look at this f***ing guy. He's a brick f***ing shit house. Sean f***ing Strickland.
He big.
Holy smokes. So, you got Sean Strickland looking like a dime, coming in at 85, and I mean, there was a lot of buzz around Strickland at 70. Again, you lose to Usman, you lose to Zaleski dos Santos, that happens. But as far as the metrics so far in his young UFC career, they're quite good. He's on the right side of 30 to this point. Not that Jack Marshman's over the hill by any means at 30. The weird fight for me, the Jack Marshman saga that's been in the UFC, again, Ryan James, Antonio Carlos Jr., again, the fight against Thiago Santos, he loses to Robertson. He beats John Phillips, which was a really weird fight, and then he loses to Edmund Shabazian. So there's that. The fight that I want to go back to is a fight against John Phillips. That fight is not one that you're going to want to go back and watch. But it was like one of those grind them out type of fights. It was a fight where you thought, oh, well, these guys are going to swing. It's a weird fight where it's a clash of whales. It didn't go like that. And it was actually, it was a pretty boring fight. For Sean Strickland, an all-action type of guy, a guy that a lot of people expect to get the finish, I think this has, like, sneaky chance of becoming either a fight of the night or performance of the night. And there's a lot of really sneaky fights. This is one of them. So we look at the votes over in Tapology. 674 so far, 90% going with Sean Strickland. If we have a look at the odds, Sean Strickland opened a -260 favorite. The line popped up to a point where Sean Strickland -200. He's now the -313 favorite average on best fight odds. Jack Marshman opened a +220. He's now at a +246. What does Jack Marshman have to do to overcome a 90% fan vote on Sean Strickland? That doesn't really mean anything. And the overwhelming odds being in Sean Strickland's favor. For Jack Marshman to get a win here, just absolutely canceling out everything we said. What does he have to do here?
So he's going to have to close the range and kind of fight Sean Strickland like Kamaru Usman did. Now, not in the same way that Kamaru Usman did, because I don't think Jack Marshman can go out there and just put on an absolute cardio kind of a fight where it's just, I'm in your face, I'm trying to take you down, I'm throwing a bunch of volume. But no, close the distance. If Sean Strickland's able to just keep on using his jab, really set up his timing from a distance and force you to kind of lunge in at him, he can catch you with shots coming in all day long. He's got really good straight punches coming down the middle, and he's not a guy who has to wind up a crazy amount on his shots. What's a good example? Like Paulo Costa, yeah, he hits really hard, but he doesn't have this big wind-up where if you are a guy like an Israel Adesanya, now it's hard to compare Adesanya to either of these guys, but if you're a guy who has really good footwork and head movement and you're a really high-level striker, you can work your way around that. For Sean Strickland, Jack Marshman does like to kind of pull up on his shots and put a lot into them, and if he is starting to try to knock out Strickland with every big shot, lunging into them, I think Strickland can probably finish him. I do think he can catch him on the way in, but that is what Marshman has to do. Force Strickland to be really uncomfortable, get his back up against the cage, really use your size, because yes, Sean Strickland looks big, and he's a big guy now at 185, but Jack Marshman is going to be cutting a lot more weight to make this weight class. Physically, just frame-wise, he is a little bit thicker, so if he can wear on Sean Strickland, really make him feel uncomfortable and show him what kind of middleweights feel like in the UFC, I think he can make him uncomfortable and maybe start to steal rounds from here and there, but I think as long as this is sort of a technical fight on the outside, it's Sean Strickland's to lose.
And I mean, for Jack Marshman, I know you might check a couple sites. It says he's at Artillery Combat MMA. I put him as being at a Shore, or out from... I put him as from being out of Shore MMA with Jack Shore and his dad, and he does train there quite a bit, so that's kind of neat. For Sean Strickland, he's been a King's MMA guy for a really long time. So for training partners, Benny and the Jets, Benil Dariush, but Marvin Vittori, Giga Chikadze, Rafael Cordero being the head coach, but also for this camp, he spent time at Syndicate MMA and a couple of different gyms in the States. And I mean, two big training partners from those gyms, Johnny Walker and Michelle Pajeda. And if I know anything, those guys are absolute wild cards. But definitely good to be training with guys like that, especially ahead of a fight like this. I like Sean Strickland as far as being a very dynamic striker. And when you're facing a guy like Jack Marshman, it definitely is. And I know fan vote and odds now will consider them a little bit. You look at them that way, this is Sean Strickland's fight to lose. I definitely think there's an opportunity for Jack Marshman to win. And that's why I wanted to go that route. I just don't really see it in this one. For Marshman to win, you definitely have to back up Sean Strickland. So if you see after the first round, Jack Marshman's really closing distance and doing a good job of it, maybe the live bet's an option. But I really do like Sean Strickland in this one. He's a bit too much of a favorite for my taste. Maybe he's a parlay piece, but I like Strickland in this fight.
You go with skills over size every single time, and I do think Sean Strickland's the more skilled out of the two, so it's just really hard to pick against him in this one.
Matt, both of us going with the return of Baltimore's Tarzan. Great tune. Sean Strickland, Dustin Pedroia's walk-up song. I'm really looking forward to this fight, Matt. At 185 pounds, should be a great one. We have a 185-pound main event between Uriah Hall and Anderson Silva that you're not going to want to miss. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight at 135 pounds. Two UFC debuts. The man on the left of the screen, Adrian Yanez, taking on vicious Victor Rodriguez in a fight that was originally supposed to be between Aaron Phillips and Yanez. Not what can I say? I am really excited about this fight, and I cannot hide the excitement, which is something I normally say to mask a fight that's not very good, but this one should deliver. Because with Adrian Yanez, if you've seen any of his performances, you're going to know where the comparisons will lie, and you will get this comparison on Fight Night. So I'm going to preface it. Adrian Yanez fights a lot like, and kind of looks like, Jorge Masvidal. His boxing is so crisp and technical. In his last fight against Brady Huang, I've watched the fight at least 7 times before this. Not the Luke Thomas 49 times, the Holloway Volkanovski 2, but 7 times out of a fight that didn't last not even a minute. It lasted 39 seconds. Adrian Yanez, the combo that he lands to finish that fight was both full of technique and full of power. His hooks are insane. His movement on the feet's great. And if you really want to get a gauge on how good Adrian Yanez is, go back and watch his fight against Kyle Estrada that headlined LFA 78 if you want a little bit of a taste. This guy is incredibly technical on the feet. He can throw nice leg kicks. He's very well-rounded. But again, it's his crisp boxing that gets it done. He's taken on really good competition. The 3 losses on his record. A split decision loss to Miles Johns in 2018. That was the headliner for LFA 55 for the belt. He loses that. He lost a split decision to Domingo Plarte back 3 years ago. And he lost to Levi Mowles at Legacy FC 37. Last time I checked, those guys are pretty darn good. You might not be a big Levi Mowles guy because he's still in the lower ranks. He's not with the UFCs, the Bellators. But Adrian Yanez coming out of Metro Boomin, Metro Fight Club, this guy looks like he could be that next big thing at 135 pounds. He's only 26 years old. I think there's a lot to really like about his game. And for Victor Rodriguez coming in on short notice out of AK-49 Fight Club up there in Alaska there, eh? You look at some of his fights. He's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This guy's a southpaw. He throws 110% into every single strike. And if he doesn't finish you early, I'd worry about it. You go back and watch his last fight. He was taking on a really tough out in Jared Mazurek, who's 8-1 going into it. Finishes him in the second round. Mazurek looked like a brick shithouse in that one. These guys slugged it out. I mean, Mazurek took him down early. Rodriguez got up, got a takedown of his own. Again, slugged it out. I can't emphasize this enough. The guy throws everything into his shots. And I mean, you look at his overall career record. He lost in 2014 to Jet Bailey. It's solid as a Rock FC. He lost to Johnny, we're going to ride those Tauntaun, and got knocked out in the first round of that fight. But apart from that, a decent record. Again, the jiu-jitsu background, you can tell just off of a limited sample size if you go back and watch the Alaska FC fights that the guy is well-rounded. I will note he wore sweatpants, a purple belt, and like work boots or like winter boots into his last fight, which is, I mean, it's par for the course in Alaska.
He dresses like James Harden.
It's Alaska. It's going to happen. This is such a mismatch. Like, it's such an odd deal of matchmaking. I get it. It's on short notice. You would have had a better matchup between Phillips and Yanez because, again, Phillips coaches. You know, we might have oversold him in his last fight out, his return to the UFC. But still, it would have made a lot more sense. I think Adrian Yanez runs away with this fight.
Wow.
Like, runs away with this fight. This is like one of those showcase type of fights. And I kind of feel bad for Victor Rodriguez. Will I eat my words? Sure. Will people in the comments rip me? 100%. Go for it. Adrian Yanez is being set up to win in this fight. I can't stress that enough.
Oh, yeah. So basically, Victor Rodriguez would really benefit if Trevor Whitman was his coach, because I do like what you had said. He throws everything behind his shots, and it's not like he's throwing these really fast overhands. There's a lot of power behind it, but he doesn't have the craziest hand speed you've ever seen. And against a guy like Yanez, who does have really crisp boxing and amazing hand speed, who can really mix it up on the inside too, because for Rodriguez to land those big bombs, he needs to be at distance and at range to land those shots, where Yanez, if he does step in, close that distance, really start to let his boxing combinations go, I think he'll have a ton of success. Yanez, I don't think is going to be like a T. Edwards coming off Contender Series where they have these highlight reel knockouts. You start hearing about, you know, the crazy athleticism, the really good knockout power, and then just kind of fade out in the UFC. I do think the sky really is the limit for Yanez, because when you look at his striking, you can kind of tell that, again, I'm probably overhyping him right now, but when you look at the people in the top 10 of most divisions, everyone kind of has the one thing that sets them apart, the one thing that makes them special. I do think Yanez's boxing is at a level in which it does kind of separate him from a lot of his contemporaries, especially at 135, where you see a lot of people who are just very well-rounded, where he brings more of a specialty to the division. So I agree. Very much a showcase fight that he should be able to run.
Like, if you like a Rob Font, maybe you get a little bit of a flash in this fight. So, I mean, again, I hate to rag on poor Victor Rodriguez. It's not his fault, but you look at the start of his career. So he fights a debuting fighter in his debut, 2011. Then another debut. Then another debut. We're into 2012. He loses 2 in a row, 2014, 2014. Takes 4 years off. Comes back in 2018 against Caleb Miller, who's 0-3, knocks him out. Then he finishes Tristan Lowe, who's 1-1. Then he finishes John George, who's 2-1. To this point, your boy Victor Rodriguez is now 6-2, and he beats Jared Mazurek, who was later in his career, and again, 8-1. Mazurek had a decent record. We went back and looked at it, had a loss to Toby Misek. Well, that's going to happen. Toby Misek, Bellator alum. But it was one of those fights where the guys just went balls to the wall, and it was who gets tired first. And Mazurek got tired, Rodriguez got on top and hit him for way too many unanswered shots. So it was a fight. It happened. I look at this one, and I look at the odds. Not much of a surprise to me, the fact that your guy, Adrian Yanez, is such a favorite. Open to -305, now -335 for Victor Rodriguez, +225. The open, he's now at a +265. Over on Tapology, limited sample size. This fight was just announced at a 630 total votes, 91% going Yanez, 71% predicting him to win by knockout. I'm of the 71% over here. Again, I'm sorry if I was way too one-sided in this prediction, because we try not to be. And if Victor Rodriguez wins, A, feather in his cap, B, I was totally wrong, and C, I will eat my words. But I do not see that happening. I think Adrian Yanez is like a as blue of a blue chip prospect as you can have at 135 coming out of the LFA circuit. He's fought for a title. He's fought UFC level competition. I can't say enough good things about him. Again, Metro Boomin', Metro Fight Club. I think Adrian Yanez gets this win quite easily.
I agree 100%. This really is a showcase for one of the higher level prospects that we're going to see at 135. And it's a division full of young, really good up-and-coming talent. So I do think Yanez could be a guy who's really going to be able to jump in, and really fun fights on the horizon for him.
Matt, both going with Adrian Yanez to get the win. I'm really looking forward to this card. A lot of under-the-radar fights. Your co-main event, Bryce Mitchell, camo shorts, taking on a really tough out Andre Fili. Touchy's a weird nickname. You have Anderson Silva, Uriah Hall in your main event. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really interesting fight at 155 pounds. We have a guy that we haven't seen in the octagon in some time in Grits. Not Brandon Gertz, but Grits. Chris Gruetzemacher taking on Alexander the Great Hernandez. Matt, Alexander Hernandez, he switched things up as of late. And I'd say late. It's been a little bit of time, but he's moved gyms over with Factory X, and you've seen this guy in the corner of a lot of your favorite fighters. I'm talking Moroccan Devil, Yusuf Salal. The list goes on and on. Alexander Hernandez has spent a lot of time in Vegas and Fight Island with Mark Montoya and the gang, cornering a lot of fighters. We talk about that very positively. I mean, Michael Chiesa is one of those guys that you'd see in corners quite a bit. Michael Johnson, up until COVID times, is another one of those guys that you've seen. Now, it didn't work out a lot for Johnson in his overall fight career, but for Michael Chiesa, since he started to corner guys, he's really gained in terms of the Corey Anderson levels in this game. So for Alexander Hernandez, always good to see a student of the game, a younger guy too, and a guy in his last 3 fights. I know one of them a win over Francisco Trinaldo, but there's you can make a strong argument that Master Anduba won that fight. Before that, a loss to Donald Cerrone. He got finished, and he got finished by Drew Dober. Cerrone's a bit of a head scratcher. Like, Alexander Hernandez went out there and talked mad shit, and he got banged. And then in the fight against Drew Dober, that's one of those guys that, like, sneakily was putting together a crazy run, if sneakily's a word. And he clipped him, he hurt him bad, and it was a statement win for Drew Dober. So Hernandez looking to get back on the schneid, as they say. For Chris Gruetzemacher, I look at this guy's last 5. We're capping, because the last fight was against the greatest fighter of all time. You know, SBG's own lightweight. Record scratch, not Conor McGregor.
Choo-choo, motherfucker.
Artem Lobov. Chris Gruetzemacher with the lost Artem Lobov, a guy who's just slowly under 500. And oh, by the way, Artem Lobov knocked him out. Then Gruetzemacher beats Abner Lavares. That's cool. It was 4 years, 10 months ago. Loses to Chaz Skelly. Loses to Davi Ramos. Beat Joe Lozon over 2 years ago. That's the problem. For Chris Gruetzemacher, I know he spent time, and you can see it up on the graphic there, with New Bern Fitness, or Karate and Fitness in New Bern, North Carolina. He spent time in Vegas as well getting ready. But Chris Gruetzemacher, such a wild card. And the trouble here is the guy has good boxing. I know you're going to go after it. 68 inches of reach, whether that's official or not, you get it from the UFC website, you cross-reference it, you do the best you can. He's going to be at a huge disadvantage in terms of reach in this fight against Alexander Hernandez. The trouble for Hernandez, and it's been to his detriment in his last 3 fights, he extends a lot into his punches. Can Gruetzemacher catch him? Sure he could. Will that happen in this fight? And if Chris Gruetzemacher is going to win, how would he win a fight like this?
So, okay, just before I get to any of those questions, let me break down Alexander Hernandez a little bit, because this fight I do think is the best thing that could have ever happened to him. Alexander Hernandez, a fighter who was very much a victim of his own hype because he came into the UFC, and again, people know there's not a bigger Beneil Dariush fan in the world than your boy right here, but he did come in absolutely starches Dariush in the first round. You're like, wow, like Alexander Hernandez, he's this crazy prospect, he's super explosive, he's a big guy for the division, he's young, he speaks well, like he checks a lot of those boxes, and you're like, wow, sky must be the limit. And then of course the whole Cowboy fight. Now, that fight was a learning experience for Hernandez, and I really thought it would have been kind of one of those, oh, this is the best thing that could happen to you, because so you fight Dariush, you knock him out, you're not going to get an easy fight after that. You're getting Cowboy. If you beat him, then wow, we're talking about like top 10 matchups. And then before the Cowboy fight, though, of course, he had that OAM fight. Now, that was the first fight where I started to question Alexander Hernandez a little bit, because it was a very grappling-heavy fight where we saw a lot of the wrestling of Hernandez. And against a guy like OAM, it is hard to look good against him just because he does have such a smothering style. It's hard to create a lot of distance and land strikes. But Hernandez was able to out-wrestle him, but I thought, okay, maybe this isn't the guy who's going to be in the top 10 and destroy everyone. And then, of course, lose the Cowboy, no big deal. The Masaranduba fight against Trinaldo was weird because it's not that he performed all that poorly in that fight. It's just he could never really get a hold of Francisco Trinaldo. The movement was really giving him a lot of problems, but he ended up getting the win. And then they matched up with Drew Dober. And I was kind of upset because the UFC, they don't do a great job building up their young stars. And I understand Drew Dober, he's not the biggest knockout threat because if you look at his UFC career, he doesn't have a ton of knockout wins. But right before that fight, he flatlined Nasrat Haqparast, who again was one of these prospects who's on a big run, had a ton of power, and Drew Dober went out there and finished him. So it wasn't the best matchmaking for Alexander Hernandez, and all of that was due to the fact that he had such a spectacular debut in the UFC. Chris Gruetzemacher, I don't really know what he can offer to Alexander Hernandez because Chris Gruetzemacher, I don't have him as like a top 25 guy. And I'm not trying to be hard on him, but you've been out for this long. And the Joe Lozon fight, you look at Joe Lozon, yes, traditionally and historically, he's been a very durable fighter. But even Joe Lozon 2.5 years ago when he fought Gruetzemacher, he's so old in his career. And he's not a guy who accepts damage really to the same degree that he used to be able to. When you look back at the wars that he's had, both fights against Jim Miller, for instance, like Joe Lozon can take an absolute beating.
Great coach. And he ended his career, hopefully, with a win over Jonathan Pierce. But yeah, that Gruetzemacher fight, I mean, it is what it is, really. And I hate to say that.
It was, and it was a corner stoppage too, but Gruetzemacher did look good. The issue I have, though, is he's taken this much time off since that fight. And it's not like he went into that fight and we saw a new Chris Gruetzemacher, and that's what beat Joe Lozon. He won that fight doing the things that kind of got him into the dance. But the issue is, I don't think the bare bones game of Chris Gruetzemacher is one of those top 15 level guys. I think Alexander Hernandez, his ceiling, I do think we'll see him with a number next to his name eventually in the UFC again. I still think he's fairly young. I think he's got a lot of potential. I just think that there's a few things that he kind of has to shore up with his striking defense. And if he gets a win over Chris Gruetzemacher, build him back up from kind of the foundation level of UFC talent. Do what you did with like a Sage Northcutt or a Mickey Gall. Maybe do it a little bit faster, of course, because I do think, you know, skill-wise, Alexander Hernandez is a very talented mixed martial artist, sorry, but I do think this is all Hernandez. He's the better wrestler. He's got more power. I think jiu-jitsu's better. I think his boxing's better. Chris Gruetzemacher, he has, I would say, above average power, but he doesn't have a really high volume or a really high work rate to where he's throwing so many punches he might be able to catch Hernandez with, you know, something on an exit. I think Hernandez has got this one in the bag, and I really don't see how he loses.
And that's the thing that I can see. I mean, if Hernandez does continue to overextend himself on some of those shots, Gruetzemacher with the you know, he's always had this reach. Since he grew into his body, he's had this reach. It's not like it's gotten bigger. Yeah, he hasn't. They haven't lopped anything off.
He's become Sean Shirk as he's aged.
So for Chris Gruetzemacher, he definitely understands distance. Being at that disadvantage, especially at a weight class like this, where you're not one of the bigger guys. So having a boxing background would definitely help, especially to pot shots in close, especially if you have a guy like that struggles with range that's longer and a guy like Hernandez. Maybe there's an opportunity for Chris Gruetzemacher, a.k.a. Sean Shirk 2.0. I mean, hey, it got him to a championship, so who knows?
Steroids helped, though.
Now, I look at this fight, and out of the total Tapology picks, 729, you have 94% going Hernandez, 53% of them predicting him to get the win by knockout. He's also one of the bigger favorites on this card. Hernandez opened a minus 350. Some early money came in on Chris Gruetzemacher to the tune of Hernandez becoming the minus 250 favorite. He's now a minus 352 favorite. If I look over at Gruetzemacher's line just for fun, open plus 285, dip to a plus 200, now at a plus 273. So odds makers had it overwhelmingly for Hernandez. The fans have it for Hernandez. I tried to give Chris Gruetzemacher a chance to win. It is difficult in this fight. Again, maybe he gets in tight and hits Hernandez with something wild. Maybe lands a nice uppercut and flatlines Hernandez. Crazier things have happened. But yeah, I mean, I definitely feel safe to pick Hernandez. Like I said, he's been cornering a lot of the top fighters with Factory X. You're definitely in a good position to train with some of the best fighters in the world there. I mean, Ian Heinisch was there for a time, and then he got Bangkok ready. Again, Yusuf Salal. The list goes on and on with fighters from that gym. For Chris Gruetzemacher, working on his fitness. She's my witness. Ooh. But apart from that, I don't know. It really is difficult there.
So, again, I like the matchmaking for Alexander Hernandez. I think he's a guy who you do want to build up. And I don't think he's a guy who is ready to fight, top 20 guys every time out there. Build him up. Let him fight, the Chris Gruetzemachers. Let him fight the Jim Millers, the Scott Holtzmans. The guys who can give you exciting fights and are going to give you a lot of looks and make you a better martial artist as you fight them and gives you experience. I think he should be able to get the win over Gruetzemacher. I don't see this being the most competitive fight ever. But after Hernandez beats Gruetzemacher, you would assume that he is going to pick up and level.
Give me another prospect versus prospect fight. I want to see Roosevelt Roberts and Alexander Hernandez. Let's get crazy, Matt. We both have Alexander Hernandez in this fight. It's a great card. A lot of under-the-radar fights. Your co-main event, Bryce Mitchell, Andre Fili, Touchy Fili, creepy nickname. In your main event, you get the Spider, another creepy one. Anderson Silva taking on Uriah Hall. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Donnie Dunphy would love this because we're just having a time. Getting ready for this fight. We have King Bobby Greene taking on Thiago Moises. Matt, I will put this out there on the line right now. This is one of the best fights on this card. You have a guy in Bobby Greene. I don't know if anybody's had a better 2020 in MMA. Insert the names here. I know Adesanya's had a good year. We can continue down the line. But Bobby Greene, his last 3 fights, so he's coming in on a losing streak. He's won 3 in a row over some good names. I mean, I don't think I have to really stress it too much, but Clay Guida, Lando Venata, and Alain Patrick. And in that fight against Patrick, Bobby Greene mopped the floor with him. He looked great. And if you're a big supporter of Thiago Moises, because I think that there's a decent opportunity for an underdog pick here. Alain Patrick was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he had spent a lot of time off and he was pretty old. And Bobby Greene looked amazing in that fight. And it's been just like a career revival for California's Greene. The guy's boxing combinations are back, the shoulder rolls in full effect, and his takedown defense is great. And that's what I can say about Bobby Greene's 2020, Matt. I mean, the guy's on fire. This is a guy that a long time ago people thought, hey, he can make waves at 155. Here's your shot, Bobby Greene, especially with a win over a guy like Thiago Moises. And for Moises in his last time out, it's been a while. It was the Michael Johnson fight where he was losing that first round against Michael Johnson's well-rounded. I mean, again, I don't have to stress the wins that he's had in his career. He's beaten some of the top-level guys that are still at the top in this division. And he's lost to guys like Thiago Moises and others. Almost lost to Artem Lobov in a co-main event slot in Moncton. But for Thiago Moises, he is a pure jiu-jitsu guy, and that much is certain. But he is relatively decent on the feet. I hope I didn't oversell it. I hope I didn't undersell it there. Fill us in on Thiago Moises.
I'm going to just do a great job selling it. Call me, hi, Billy Mays here with Thiago Moises. So he has a really interesting game, and I wouldn't say it is in the Damian Maia category because there are a few key differences, but Moises does really stress the takedown a lot, and I do like the Michael Johnson fight, kind of paralleling this one with that, because Michael Johnson has the really good boxing skills, and he has good wrestling defense, very similar to Bobby Greene, but it's weird because Bobby Greene and Michael Johnson kind of seesawed each other. Michael Johnson used to be at the top of the division, and then his skills have kind of seemed to regress as Bobby Greene's continued to improve, even at the stage of his career. And I do think that the guys who he has fought on this, recent run have sort of prepped him for a fight like this, because Clay Guida, he's not what he used to be. He doesn't have crazy power. His wrestling's not as explosive, but he's a good guy to get you ready for the straight jiu-jitsu, MMA fighters, because you're going to be defending takedowns constantly. You're going to have to keep up with his output on the feet. If you're able to kind of get over that hurdle, then I do favor you in a fight like this, because Moises on the feet, he's not going to offer Bobby Greene that much, because Bobby Greene, he's a phenomenal boxer. The only guys who really give him trouble on the feet are the Edson Barbosas, the Dustin Poiriers.
Drakkar Klose.
The Drakkar Klose. But even that fight, I thought Bobby Greene won, honestly. Greene's wrestling offense is something that is really surprising, too. It's something that he has started to use a little bit more in this stage of his career.
Don't do it in this fight, Bobby.
No, this is definitely not the fight to do it in, but if he does have success on the feet, he is starting to go for takedowns because his top control is really good, and he's got great ground and pound from the top position. He doesn't pass guard all that often. He will just kind of sit in his opponent's guard, throw those longer hooks to try to get to his opponent's head. Again, would not recommend doing that in this fight because we saw, again, to throw back to the Michael Johnson fight, Moises loses that first round handily, gets outstruck really badly, and then immediately second round starts, goes out there and gets the submission like it's nothing. So he can really flip that switch. And I say this with some fighters. I don't know if I put Moises on that level, but he's got similar to that one hit, one kill jiu-jitsu where it's like, okay, for as long as you're on the ground with this guy, you have to be worried about your ankles, your knees, your wrists, your arms, everything really, because he's that high level of a black belt that if you do make any mistakes in the transitions, he can catch a submission. With all that being said, I do think Bobby Greene just has the tools to beat a guy like Thiago Moises. He's got the wrestling defense if the striking is getting to Moises, and if he does start shooting for takedowns, I think Bobby Greene can keep this fight on the feet. And even though Bobby Greene is at this sort of advanced stage in his career, he's got really good cardio for the output that he puts out. It's not like he's a guy who just kind of pot shots as he gets tired throughout the fight. He has a really high output, and if he is able to really damage you early on in the fight, yes, his cardio is going to fade, but I would say he has very average cardio. It's not like he fades, you know, to this crazy amount where he's almost unusable by the third round. With Moises, if he does get off to a good start and is really grappling heavy, he might tire himself out, and I do kind of worry about that because Bobby Greene, really resilient guy. It's not like you're going to go out there and really rely on the fact that you're going to finish him. So if Bobby Greene can get past that first round and a half, take some of the explosiveness away from Moises, I do think he'll kind of be able to put on a boxing clinic on the feet.
If you look at the total votes over in Tapology, does this surprise you at all? That 759 total votes, 87% have Bobby Greene, 86% of them have him to win by decision. If we look at the odds quickly, Matt, I mean, Bobby Greene, one of the bigger favorites on the card, open to -170. Wish I got him there. Wish I got him when he was at -225. He's now at a -300. And if we look at Thiago Moises, open +145. He's now a +237 underdog. I don't like where it's at now, but I think where it's at now actually has a lot of value if you like Thiago Moises, because there's definitely more than an opportunity than those Tapology votes or the odds would suggest. I mean, Thiago Moises, I get it. He didn't beat Benny and the Jets, Beneil Dariush. He's faced a weird level of competition so far in his UFC run. You look at the win that he had on Contender Series over Kudus, loses to Dariush, beats Kurt Holloway, loses to Magulov, beats Michael Johnson. It's a seesaw. Like, I think, personally, Damir Magulov has a good opportunity in the UFC to become, this might be controversial, to become ranked at 55. Michael Johnson, is he a 45er? Is he a 55er? Where's he at? And I mean, he won that first round handily and then went out there and got submitted really quickly. So, does Bobby Greene have the wherewithal to use that takedown defense at 74% so far in a long UFC career? Can he keep it standing? Because if it does, and again, as this fight continues on, they're going to start to sweat. And that's going to be a disadvantage for Thiago Moises. I don't know. I just see this as being a fight that's definitely Bobby Greene's. I think he's going to be able to set things up on the feet and withstand the takedown attempts from Moises. But, and I have to stress, but I would not put a single dime on this fight. It's a pop and popcorn fight if I've ever seen one. I'm just looking forward to this one, but I'm going with Bobby Greene here.
Yeah, I do think this could be a really fun fight, and I do think this is kind of a sneaky pick for fight of the night, because it could just kind of devolve into an absolute brawl, because Bobby Greene does have those kind of fights. He is a guy who, if he does stick to his technique and his boxing skill, he can go out there, really work the jab, and, you know, show off some of his technique, but Bobby Greene not afraid to kind of go out there and brawl. And it does come down to how good is his takedown defense in this fight, because if it is on the feet, he's going to be able to outstrike Thiago Moises for 15 minutes. That's one of the least surprising things I'll say in any of these videos. But if it does go to the ground, like we mentioned, Moises got that absurd jiu-jitsu, can finish Bobby Greene. And I do think that's the coin flip that you have. It's either all Bobby Greene on the feet or all Thiago Moises on the ground. And I'm just going to stick with Bobby Greene.
Matt, we're both going with Bobby Greene in this fight. I'm really looking forward to it. A great main card. So you're going to want to watch those videos in the playlist. If you please, keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Big fight at heavyweight, and I can't stress big enough. We have the Prince of War, Greg Hardy, on the left-hand side, taking on the crochet boss, Maurice Greene, who's not afraid to crochet, going Instagram Live to answer some fan questions. Now, Matt, as far as this fight's concerned, in the overall scheme of the heavyweight division, Greg Hardy, since he became a pro just a couple of years ago, has faced an absurd level of talent. You look at it from the start. I mean, we're talking the Austin Lanes of the world. I mean, it's two former pro football players taking on each other in Contender Series. And then he gets the incremental steps up, and then he's fighting Alexander Volkov on short notice and losing tremendously, even though he had some pockets of success in that fight, had a broken hand, had Dean Thomas in his corner, all kinds of crazy stuff. For Greg Hardy, the journey into MMA has been a strange one. It's just been a weird bucket of muscles, as Craig would say. In this fight, it's tough to gauge what you're going to get, because for Greg Hardy, look at his last fight against Yorgan De Castro. A fight that De Castro looked like he was going to win in the first round, and then after that, Greg Hardy just kind of cruised behind a jab and won the fight by decision. And that's the thing with Greg Hardy. When he gets in trouble, what does he do? He just circles and throws a jab. And that's what he does. That's Greg Hardy. Remember those impressive knockouts that you got a couple of years ago? You're not really getting that wild style anymore. And maybe that's just the evolution of a martial artist. The guy only has 9 pro fights, and one of them was a no contest to Alan Crowder where he knocked him out with an illegal knee on a huge card, I might add. For Maurice Greene, again, consistently inconsistent. This is a guy that, down with LFA, looked like an absolute world beater. And then he comes into the UFC, avenges a fight against Jeff Hughes, beats Junior Albini by knockout, loses to Sergey Pavlovich. Well, that's going to happen. That guy's built like a brick house. Loses to Alexei Oleinik in a fight that was absolutely terrible. And then his last fight out, one of the worst fights I've ever seen.
Pulled off one of the greatest submissions you've ever seen.
Was pretty cool. He fought Dadbod Jean Vellante, mopped the floor with him. So for Maurice Greene, getting finishes, racking up the wins. For Greg Hardy, again, it's been an odd journey so far. This is a tough fight to try and predict. It honestly is, because you have two guys that are, and to use a Fight Night Picks term, consistently inconsistent.
This fight really comes down to who gets tired first. And let's be honest, it's probably going to be the viewer, because Greg Hardy and Maurice Greene aren't known as two of the more exciting heavyweights in the division. Maurice Greene, we can say he mopped the floor with Jean Vellante, not remembering that fight all that well. Jean Vellante dropped Maurice Greene, and they both got really tired really quick. And Maurice Greene made him submit, and that was one of the weirdest submissions you'll ever see. Because
kind of cool.
It was... But it wasn't cool because it's like, oh, wow, he pulled off something using this like crazy level of technique. It was like, wow, Jean Vellante really tapped due to that. Maurice Greene, not known for a crazy submission ability. He does have the better submission game out of these two, I would say.
Number of them on his record.
Exactly, but it's not like Maurice Greene's going to go out there and really fish for a rear naked choke. I do think we are going to see a more grappling-centric game plan for Maurice Greene in this, because Greg Hardy... Again, there's still so many question marks. Most of his really MMA career has taken place in the UFC, and there's so many strange performances, because you look at what a guy like Alexander Volkov is able to do to other people, and you think, well, Greg Hardy made a pretty good account of himself in that fight. And then you look at his other performances, even in the wins, like the Juan Adams win. Juan Adams shoots in for a quick takedown, gets finished immediately with hammer fist. In most of Greg Hardy's other fights, cardio's been an issue for him. It is weird because when he does get tired, he kind of goes into this cardio-efficient mode, like you had mentioned in the Orton Castro fight, where he kind of gets on his bike and pumps the jab a lot. It's hard to be critical of his skills because he is new to the sport. And then just last thing, I just don't think Greg Hardy's an overly entertaining MMA fighter. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. It's not like Greg Hardy, when he shows up, it's like, wow, this is must-see TV. I understand he's a big name.
No. The UFC will lead you to believe that.
Exactly. But when you just look at him, I'm not, harping on his skills as much as I just don't think he's a guy who's the most exciting fighter in the world. I think he's a guy who has low output, has decent power if he can catch you. Of course, he's a phenomenal athlete. There's no way to deny that. But when I look at his MMA skill set, I like how they're building him. They're doing a much better job with him than they are with Alexander Hernandez, like I had mentioned in the previous video. But I don't really know where the ceiling for Greg Hardy is. That's really what I come back to every time we break down one of his fights.
And I need to interject, and the only reason I talked about it, the Ben Sassoli fight's the no contest. The Crowder was a DQ loss, so there is that. But that no contest against Ben Sassoli, that's Puffergate. And in that fight, it was the same thing. Well, I'm getting tired. What am I going to do? Pump that jab. Work that jab. And can I take this puffer? Well, I'm going to do it. So for Greg Hardy, this fight's going to be marketed. It's a marquee heavyweight matchup. Do I expect a finish? Both guys are susceptible to losing. And I mean, I say that even though Greg Hardy has a 3-to-1 win ratio. But in this fight, it is tough to tell what you're going to get, because you have Maurice Greene that dedicated himself to MMA, making the move to Jackson Wink, training with some of the best in the world. He's one of the longer fighters that you're going to find in this division. 2 inches of reach in his advantage or in his corner, 2 inches of height as well. Older fighter, more experienced fighter. That doesn't play out so with the odds. If we have a look at them, Greg Hardy, a fairly decent favorite, open to -205. The line dropped quick. He's a -308 on best fight odds. For Maurice Greene, open to +175, now to +242. If we have a look at the total votes on Tapology, 827, 82% going Hardy, 75% saying he's going to win by knockout. I find all of that quite ridiculous.
Okay, I do think this is one of the more finishable fights for Greg Hardy, just because Maurice Greene doesn't deal with pressure all that well. He is a really tall guy, and if you do force him backwards up against the cage, it forces him to have a really tall posture, and he is susceptible to a big shot.
Like Stefan Struve when he fought Tai Tuivasa, or when he fought Roy Nelson, or any of his fights.
Really anybody, but Maurice Greene, it's wild to see how the narrative shifted on his career in one fight, because after the Jean Vellante fight, it was really looking like he was going to fight Tanner Boser, another guy in the heavyweight division who's really making his way up. He's doing great things right now. He's looking like he's going to be in the top 15 any day now. And now Maurice Greene's fighting Greg Hardy. So it's wild to see. He could have fought a really big up-and-comer who, like, technically looks really good, but now he's fighting a guy with a big name, and I would say skill-wise probably isn't on the same level. But Maurice Greene, if he is able to get Greg Hardy down, I do think he will have success. I just don't think he's going to be able to get the takedown. I think Greg Hardy, his takedown defense is going to be good enough to where it's going to stay on the feet. He's going to be able to land some of those jabs, work Maurice Greene up against the cage. This is not going to be an entertaining fight, I don't believe, unless there is a quick finish in the first round. But I think Greg Hardy by decision is probably the safest bet, not by submission.
It's such a tough one. Like, this is a pass if I've ever seen one, really. I mean, at 300 to 1, like, at minus 300, for the odds to be there, you have to be so certain that that fighter is going to get the win. To even toss that in as a parlay or anything, do you have that much confidence that Greg Hardy's going to win? Now, I know there's going to be a commenter down there, and you're going to go hard as a mother and say, yeah, Greg Hardy's going to win, impressive knockout, and if it happens, you look like a genius. You're throwing darts at a board. How confident do you feel in that one? So for me, with Greg Hardy, like you said, in his more, I want to say technical fights, but where we've seen him kind of grow as a fighter, he's employed the jab. Maybe he throws a bit of a kick. He tried that. It worked a little bit against Yorgan Castro. He won the fight. You're fighting a guy, Maurice Greene, that, again, he's sneaky. He has submission abilities. Can he get the fight to the ground? Well, if Greg Hardy pressures, I don't believe so. Is Greg Hardy's cardio great? I wouldn't hang my hat on it. He needed a puffer that time, and if that's the case, especially traveling all the way across the world, weird sleep schedule, I think that's definitely going to negatively affect him. Am I confident in picking him? Not at all, but I'm more confident in picking Greg Hardy than I am with Maurice Greene. And this is one of those fights that it's almost a throwaway, and if it's an impressive performance, probably going to be on the Greg Hardy side. So with a lot of reluctance, I'm going with Greg Hardy, Matt.
It's never a great sign when you have to pick the guy who you can envision losing less, and that's just how I see Greg Hardy in this matchup.
Oh boy, it's a tough one, Matt. We're both going with Greg Hardy. Maurice Greene, surprise us. Surprise everyone out there. That would be the cat's behind, but we have an interesting card. I mean, Bryce Mitchell taking on Fili in the co-main event. In the main event, Anderson Silva, the retirement fight, the Cowboy rides away, taking on a really tough out in Uriah Hall. Matt, really looking forward to it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Absolute fire on our main card. We have Makhmud Muradov taking on Trailblazer Kevin Holland. Matt, seems like Kevin Holland's fighting every single weekend. And for Makhmud Muradov, the first fighter represented by the money team, there's some Canadian loonies and toonies for y'all out there on the internet. The money team. And Matt, I can't really hype this fight up enough. I don't think I'm going to be able to give it enough credit. That's how excited I am for this, because we had a fighter from Uzbekistan competing last weekend in Lilia Shakarova. Did not go well against Lauren Murphy, but for Makhmud Muradov, A, to be represented by Floyd Mayweather's group, but B, to be on such a run like he is, 24-6, wild win streak going back a number of years. He's finishing opponents. He has crazy power in his hands. He has decent wrestling as well. He's a very, very exciting fighter to watch in this division, and a guy that a lot of people might not be overly familiar with coming into this fight. He only has 2 UFC contests to his name, a decision win over Alessio Di Chirico, and his last time out, a great finish win over Trevor Smith. And that's kind of the nuts and bolts of Makhmud Muradov's UFC career. I don't think he's been hyped up all that much by the promotion, which kind of sucks because I'd like to see more of Muradov. And for Kevin Holland, I mean, the sky's been the limit for this guy. I know he just lost a close split decision to Darren Stewart in a fight where I thought he won the first 2 rounds, then the 3rd round went to Stewart. I mean, the pace kind of started to become an issue.
He did win.
And Darren Stewart, again, yeah, he did win.
Oh, you had said he lost.
No. He did win, but again, for Kevin Holland, Darren Stewart's a tough matchup for anybody in that middleweight division. You saw it against Edmund Shabazian. You've seen it against Duran Wynn. Well, you saw it against Kevin Holland. And Kevin Holland, one of those guys that he's just edging on that top 15. I really do think that he's a top fighter. On any given day, he poses a lot of problems for that division. And you saw that in his UFC debut. Didn't go his way. Lost to Thiago Santos up a weight class. But this guy is incredibly dynamic, has good jiu-jitsu, decent wrestling, and really, really dynamic striking. And he makes for a tough test in his own right for any of these guys in this division. I love this fight stylistically because you have good wrestling, good striking out of Muradov. You have a really well-rounded fighter in Kevin Holland that sometimes comes out with knee, not braces, but the old Dan Kelly special. He's all wrapped up. But either way, I love this fight. What do you make out of this one?
So this is a really interesting fight because although it is a clash of styles in the way that they grapple, both guys more than happy to strike it out on the feet. Muradov, a much more powerful athlete than Kevin Holland, but I don't think Kevin Holland gets the credit for how strong of a striker he really is. He's got deceiving power because he's got this whipping way of throwing his punches where he catches you at the end of his shots. I know the Joaquin Buckley fight is, everyone's really high on Buckley because of how crazy his knockout was. It was too much too soon for him against Holland, of course, but the way in which Holland was able to knock him out sort of played with him throughout a lot of the fight because his striking, he is able to keep such a range that if he is able to stand back, throw those big, nice power shots down the middle, and that's how he caught Buckley on the exit from a clinch through that nice straight right down the middle, caught him clean on the way out. And the Darren Stewart fight was an interesting one too, because Darren Stewart, you know about the power, just how big and strong of an athlete he is. Kevin Holland didn't look his best in that fight, but I thought he did a good job to at least neutralize the power and some of the strengths of Darren Stewart. Stewart was able to hit him sometimes, don't get me wrong, but he was able to really avoid the big shots of Darren Stewart because you know what the danger is when you're fighting a guy like that. The big hooks, the overhands. If he catches you with anything, you can go to sleep. So I think it was a very cautious fight from Kevin Holland, but I do think that it was sort of one of those learning fights where, okay, that was a tough one. I probably should have looked better, but I can sort of take these lessons and move on. And Muradov is a guy who, if he really stuck to his wrestling, I would like him more because if he goes out there, sticks to just shooting double legs, hip tosses too, he's got really good wrestling from the clinch, I think he'd have decent success, and especially against a guy like Kevin Holland, who really the one weakness in his game, okay, so if you strike at him at range, he's really good at that. If on the ground, unless your name's Brennan Allen, he's a really good submission threat and you don't want to be there with him. But the wrestling, if you are a guy who's really good top control like a Muradov, I think he could really use that weakness, or really use his strength, to the weakness of Kevin Holland in the wrestling department. The problem is, I don't know if he can stay dedicated to a really wrestling-oriented game plan through a 15-minute fight, because you know Kevin Holland's going to be there for really as long as the fight is. You're going to have to finish him brutally, really, if you're going to want to get him out of there. I don't know if Muradov has that kind of skill set to go out there and really kind of maul Kevin Holland, because I do think that's what he's going to have to do to get success in this fight. If he does just try to stay at range, throw really big overhand rights, and if he just relies on, okay, I can catch Kevin Holland with a big shot, I think that could be the worst game plan he has going in here, and it would really contribute to his downfall overall.
And I mean, I look at this current win streak, 13 fights in a row for Makhmud Muradov. I mean, a great win over Wendell Oliveira, Octagon 13, to punch his ticket. He had a win over Alberto Uda as well with Octagon 12. And then again, D. Kirko and Trevor Smith, third round knockout. You know that the power stays heavy into that third round. It's a great fight. I mean, it really is. You can't look too hard into the stats and the nuts and bolts that way as far as UFC stats are concerned, because you only have a 2-fight sample size for Muradov. You have more so with Kevin Holland. And again, level of competition for Kevin Holland is really the strong suit. I mean, this guy's been fighting some big names for, it seems like, the longest time. For a guy that made his debut, or his pro debut rather, not that long ago, 2015, and he already has a 19-5 total record. I mean, on the, the regional scene, Will Santiago on Contender Series, then he beats Thiago Santos, beats John Phillips, beats Gerald Mearshart, beats D. Kirko, former common opponent, loses to Brennan Allen, beats Hernandez, beats Buckley, beats Stewart by slim margin, split decision. Again, probably won the first 2 rounds of that fight, lost the third. I think ultimately it is a very interesting fight, and it is a tough one to try and predict. I mean, you have a look at the odds. They are very close. Kevin Holland, the favorite, open to -102, now to -165. If you look at Muradov, open the favorite -118, now at a +137. So the money has come in on Kevin Holland so far. If you look at the total predictions over on Tapology, it is 723, 69% with Kevin Holland, 60% of those voters predicting him to win by decision. Again, it is very tough, and I anticipate, and let us know in the comments below who you're taking, I anticipate a flood of commenters going with Makhmud Muradov. I anticipate the overall polling of the votes at Fight Night Picks on Instagrams, where you can find them, to be with Kevin Holland. So for that measure, usually the loudest voices are the commenters going with the underdogs. I know how it works. And it is tough, and you could call me out and you could say, hey Craig, you never go with underdogs. I get some underdog picks in this card, but I am going with Kevin Holland in this fight. Maybe it's not the most confident. It is more of a pop and popcorn type fight for me, because I think stylistically this is a great fight. It's one that might fly under the radar because it's more name value with Holland than the money team's Makhmud Muradov. But overall, I love the fight. I'm going with Holland. I think, again, striking from distance as the coins continue to drop, he has the reach advantage. Muradov definitely has to close the distance, which I anticipate he will. But I like the tools that Kevin Holland possesses to get this one done.
So yeah, there's definitely a path to victory for Muradov, but unless he is just really implementing his wrestling and working so hard on that, I don't see how he beats Kevin Holland. I think if it does stay on the feet, I think the striking of Kevin Holland at range is going to be enough that he's going to stay out of the way of the big shots of Muradov and be able to land his zone. And as the fight progresses, we know Kevin Holland, another guy who does keep his power late into a fight, and not that he has crazy power, but he's really good at making his opponent walk into his shots, and I think that's something that's going to happen in this one. I got Kevin Holland. I think this should be a phenomenal fight, though.
Matt, both really looking forward to this fight, and we both have Kevin Holland to get the win. You're not going to want to miss our co-main event and main event previews. You got Bryce Mitchell taking on Touchy Fili, Andre Fili. You have Anderson Silva taking on Uriah Hall. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. What can I say, Matt? This fight is great. We have Thug Nasty coming out with camo shorts this week. Bryce Mitchell, and he's taking on Andre Touchy Fili. Such a weird nickname, such a deceiving fighter. I mean, Andre Fili so far in his young, and it's not even a young UFC career. The guy's been around for the longest time, but he is young. He's only 30 years old, and he's taken on some of the best names in the sport. And we'll get into that section in a minute. For Bryce Mitchell, you look at the blemish on his record. You can't see it up on the screen, but he did lose to Brad Katona, who's no longer in the UFC, on The Ultimate Fighter. But since then, again, Bryce Mitchell just continues to win. Beat Tyler Moffat, beat Tyler Diamond, beat Bobby Moffat, beat Matt Sales by Twister, beat Charles Rosa
by almost Twister.
Matt, in that fight, I've never seen somebody grapple their way to such scorecards. There were two 30-25s and there was a 30-24. That's absolutely insane. And for Bryce Mitchell, he's such a squirrely fighter. It's not because he's from Arkansas. It's not the way he talks. It's not the fact that he eats and hunts for squirrels. Most of that's normal. It's not the fact that he wants to wear camo shorts so bad, and we'll get the opportunity this week. It's the way that he fights. And you're going to see it up on screen. Maybe the UFC has him listed as a southpaw. Maybe other websites have him listed as orthodox. I put him as switch because you watch his fights, and he'll start one round in the southpaw stance. He'll work out of it. He'll switch to orthodox, and vice versa. He's not the best striker, but it works. It's functional. It's wonky. He can throw a little bit of power, but it's all to set up the takedown and the grappling. And once he's got the fight to the mat, this guy is a wizard. And you look at what he did against Charles Rosa, and I remember the comments before in the video. They said, oh, you guys are wrong. Charles Rosa is a black belt, goes to ATT. He's got some of the best training partners in the world. You weren't wrong for saying that. But Bryce Mitchell was just on that other level, especially that night. So coming into this fight, the guy's got a head of steam. He's got a lovely little YouTube channel too. Maybe check that one out if you're not watching Fight Night Picks. And his opposite, Andre Fili, this is where it gets a little weird. So for Andre Fili, he's trained a Team Alpha Male for a very long time against some of the best wrestlers in the lower weight classes. Uriah Faber, heading the team. Chad Mendes, Darren Elkins. The list goes on and on and on. Josh Emmett's another one. We can continue for the rest of the day. TJ Dillashaw used to be there. So he's really trained with the highest level of training partner. The success has been mixed. But again, he's taken on some of the best names in this division. Matt, let it be known. I mean, who's Andre Fili fought so far in the UFC?
Yair Rodriguez, Max Holloway, Sadiq Youssef, Dennis Bermudez. Like, Andre Fili doesn't have easy fights. He's always been a guy who they match up really hard. Because you look at some guys in the UFC, and we talk about this a lot, where you look, they might have 6 fights and they've won 3 and lost 3, but the 3 guys they've lost to are now in the top 15, and the 3 people they beat are now no longer in the UFC. Andre Fili, unfortunately for him, I guess, only fights killers. And he is kind of in that gatekeeper position. I know a lot of fighters hate the term, but I don't really even mean it in a disrespectful way, because Andre Fili just gives everyone a hard fight. It doesn't matter who you are. Max Holloway, he was doing really well in that fight up until he got guillotined at the end. It's going to happen. Max Holloway, arguably one of the best pound-for-pound fighters really ever. The Yair Rodriguez loss is pretty bad because that was, okay, Andre Fili, he's at peak prospect watch. He's at the Eric Silva heights of his hype. And Yair Rodriguez went out there and jump switch kicked him in the head and knocked him out really bad. But again, we're talking about Yair Rodriguez, a guy who I think is ranked in, if not the top 5, top 7 right now. And Max Holloway, one of the better fighters of all time. So Andre Fili's losses have come from the elite of the elite. His wins are weird because they always say Andre Fili's such a good striker, such a good, guy from range. He has really good offensive wrestling. He is known to mix it up really well. I don't like him off his back very much. We talk about this all the time, the Louis Smolka effect, where he doesn't work to get up from his back. He is kind of comfortable just laying on his back, where if Bryce Mitchell is able to get the takedown, if he's able to get on top, Andre Fili, not just Andre Fili, anyone's in a lot of danger, but just the way that Fili does grapple, there's not a lot of urgency for him to always get back up to his feet, and he's able to get held down. Sadiq Youssef was a guy who was able to do that, and yes, Youssef's style is the polar opposite of Mitchell, where Sadiq Youssef has he could knock it a horse, really, if he caught it clean. But he's got crazy good... He's got good wrestling, but his ground and pound from top position, it's just so heavy, and he has such a presence to him that it was really able to pin Andre Fili, whereas Bryce Mitchell, a very different style of grappling where it's more finesse-oriented. He's not just kind of a bruiser once it gets on the ground. Such a contrast in styles. The Andre Fili who fought Artem Lobov, shout out to Artem Lobov, and I do think that fight is important because you look at Artem Lobov...
Connor, shh, you can't, Connor.
I don't think he's watching this, but... Bryce Mitchell, his striking, it's not the best part of his game, I would say. Artem Lobov is probably a better striker than Bryce Mitchell, but they do kind of have that same awkwardness to them, and neither guy has the longest of arms, so I do think Andre Fili, from range, he has a really good front kick. He's got a really nice stabbing jab, too, something he doesn't really get the credit that he deserves, because if he is able to stay at range, really work his jab and his front kick, we saw it against Yusuf, and Sadiq Yusuf, I do think, is one of the better prospects in all of MMA, not just in the featherweight division. I thought Andre Fili did exceptionally well against him at range in the striking. I thought the body kicks were good. I thought the leg kicks were good. And I thought he did really good work against Yusuf. So if he can do that against Sadiq Yusuf on the feet, I am curious to see the level of success he'll have against Bryce Mitchell.
And I mean, you look at Andre Fili in his last fight, it was kind of the same idea. He was fighting Charles Jourdain at a Quebec, Canada, at a Beloy, Quebec, Canada. And it was one of those fights. It was close. It was a split decision. I ultimately thought that Fili did win the fight. But it was one of those fights where you have an up-and-coming guy in Charles Jourdain. He had that win over Doo Ho Choi on his record already, so people are excited about him. Can you beat Andre Fili? Now, Andre Fili put on a classic veteran performance and really beat Charles Jourdain in a lot of the aspects of his game. I mean, what's Jourdain good at? Well, that kick. You have to watch out for his whipping kick. It's his big move, and his hands are great, too. Bryce Mitchell, totally different animal. So for Andre Fili, he's training day in and day out with some of the best wrestlers in the world. So can he keep this fight standing? Because I'd say without a shadow of a doubt, Andre Fili wins this fight 10 times out of 10 if it's on the feet. Bryce Mitchell has really wonky striking. I said it from the start. He'll switch between orthodox and southpaw. He's decent from both sides. But he doesn't strike like Damian Maia. He doesn't strike like some of those higher level, like a Rodolfo Vieira. Some of those really high level jiu-jitsu practitioners have like sneaky, deceptive striking. Bryce Mitchell, it's like seeing a night train. Well, you know what's coming. You can hear it coming. You can see the lights. You can hear the dings. It's on its way. I think Andre Fili can withstand some of that anyway.
I do too, and I do think the longer this fight stays in the feet, the more uncomfortable Bryce Mitchell is going to be, and that's really going to force out a lot of panic takedowns from him. Fili's best game plan, I would assume, force Bryce Mitchell and force him to shoot takedowns on you. It's kind of like what McGregor was trying to do against Khabib, where if you really pressure a wrestler, you force the takedowns from them, and then you make them do it. It's not just them kind of free-flowing, not to sound like Robin Black, but they're not in their kind of element at that point where you're forcing the pressure, you're making them make bad shots. And if Fili is able to kind of... I used this example before we started filming, but Chase Hooper, when he fought Alex Caceres, you had a guy who... Is he a gatekeeper? I'd say Caceres is a little bit less than, but he's a guy who has good striking on the feet. He is quite dynamic in his striking, but on the floor, he's not great. Andre Fili, he has good takedown defense. He has a lot of the same skills and positives that Caceres has, but he does have the wrestling defense. And what Caceres was able to do against Hooper was keep him on the feet, really expose the weakness in his game, which is the striking. I don't know if Andre Fili is going to do the same thing, but it is something that I'm starting to get a little concerned with because Bryce Mitchell, I do think this is one of those fights, and it's a classic example of it's going to be really one-sided. I just don't know who it's going to be one-sided for. It's either Andre Fili completely lights up Bryce Mitchell on the outside, throws those body kicks, hurts him with them, hurts him with the leg kicks, takes away a lot of the explosiveness of Bryce Mitchell and his takedowns. He's just able to rack up points that way, maybe get a finish later on. Or Bryce Mitchell is able to get the takedown quite easily. He's able to really implement some different submission sequences. And even if he doesn't get the submission, if in round one Bryce Mitchell gets on top and starts beating the brakes off Andre Fili, if he's able to get the takedown easily, I think that's really the story of the fight. If he can get the takedown, he's going to be able to win.
Same thing as the fight against Charles Rossi. Never have I seen a scorecard. 30-25, 30-25, 30-24 for a guy that didn't earn a submission, didn't really have to chuck hands, and kept such a good black belt down on the ground. You know how good Charles Rose is. If you want to disagree with me, well, then that's fine. But in this fight, again, it's so tough because it's such a clash of styles with a young up-and-comer that so far in the UFC's run shop through all the fighters he's faced. I mean, you look at Bryce Mitchell's fight against Matt Sales. How often do you see a twister? Not very often. Korean Zombie did it. Who else has done it?
That's it.
That's it, those two. So in this fight, it is so interesting for that fact. Now, we look at the odds, Matt. Bryce Mitchell is the favorite as it stands. Open to -110. He's now at a -157. For Andre Fili, open a -110 at Pick'em. Now at a +130. If you go over to Tapology, 821 total votes, 78% going with Mitchell, 54% of those voters saying that he's going to win by submission. So the money's on Bryce Mitchell. The fan vote is on Bryce Mitchell. Again, we haven't seen this guy face much adversity so far in the UFC. I would expect that Andre Fili is really that benchmark test of, okay, Bryce Mitchell beats Andre Fili. This guy is going to have a lot of success against that top 10. And at 145 pounds, we're talking about a division that's really picked up some names. I mean, we're really starting to gain at 45. Bryce Mitchell gets a big statement win here in a co-main event with the camo shorts on. Holy smokes, the world is yours, as Nas said. So what do you think about this one?
Okay, I think Andre Fili is a really smart underdog bet. I will say that. I think him at plus money, it's a good idea. I do think the striking of him is so much better than Bryce Mitchell's. He has a path to victory. I think Bryce Mitchell only needs the one takedown. I really do. For as good as Andre Fili's ground game is, and I do think he has an underrated ground game, I think what Bryce Mitchell did to Charles Rosa was like Damian Maia, Gunnar Nelson-esque, where it's, okay, we have one good grappler, but this is the difference between a good grappler and a great grappler. And that's really what Bryce Mitchell was able to show off in that fight. I think the striking of Andre Fili is good, but again, it's not like he has this crazy amount of pop on his shots where he only needs to land that one big one on Bryce Mitchell. I think he does need an accumulation, and that means that he is going to need Bryce Mitchell to be standing stationary in front of him. Bryce Mitchell always going to be doing something, whether it is the striking, whether it is the wrestling. He has a little bit of that Clay Guida in him where he's just doing something. And I do really like that out of an MMA fighter, because you know that if the fight does go to the cards, as long as they're doing things and not getting hit a lot, there's always a good chance for them to at least pick up a decision. I don't agree with the fact that beating Andre Fili means that you can get into that top 10. Josh Emmett,
15.
Even then, like, featherweight is just murderer's row. Bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight. And it used to really only be everyone talked about lightweight, but I really do think those four divisions are as good as any division has ever been in MMA. That's just how deep they are. But I'm going to say Bryce Mitchell gets it done. I think he'll be able to get the submission win. I do think there's going to be a lot more hype behind Bryce Mitchell after this weekend, but that's the one thing I'm worried about. After you beat Andre Fili, there's no more easy fights. And not that any of the guys we fought before were easy to say, but after you beat Andre Fili, then you do have to fight the Sadiq Yusufs. You do have to fight those up-and-coming guys who are kind of in the same category as yourself. You're no longer going to be fighting the gatekeepers or maybe the older guys who have had a few losses. You're going to be fighting the guys who, they're also on the rise, and they're also hungry like you are, and they do have specialties. So Bryce Mitchell, I'm going to say wins this fight, but I do think the matchmaking is going to be getting a lot harder for him moving forward after this one.
And I mean, next, think about it. You got Mirsad Bektik. You've got tough fighters like Andre Fili's teammate, Darren Elkins. You got Dan Ige. You've got Ricardo Lamas that had a big win over Bill Algeo, and he retired. So there's still names out there at 45, and apparently some of them are retired. So I'll just keep bringing up old, long, bygone 45ers. In this fight, though, you have to worry about it for Andre Fili. He did get submitted by such a name as Godofredo Pepe. You know, Godofredo Pepe.
He's a wizard on the ground.
He is a wizard on the ground. And so is Bryce Mitchell. So it is a difficult one. I like the takedown defense of Andre Fili. I like it if he's striking on the feet. I like his length. He uses it half decently well. That's a terrible thing to say about a guy near the end of a video. He uses it half decently well. But I do like all those things for Andre Fili. And I think if he can push a bit of a pace as the fight goes on, it's going to go more towards Andre Fili in those respects. I'm going to go with the underdog in Andre Fili. Now, for full transparency, in our co-main event last weekend, it was a nail-biter. Matt went with Whitaker. I went with Cannonier. I wanted to change my pick in the 11th hour. I stuck it out.
Pretty one-sided fight.
And I got wrong. Yeah, I got it wrong. But still, I'm really looking forward to this fight. It should be a really good one, Matt. You're going with Bryce Mitchell. I'm going to side with Touchy Fili, creepy nickname. You're going to want to keep it locked in for our main event preview. We have Uriah Hall taking on Anderson Silva. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Finally, time for our main event of the evening. We have primetime Uriah Hall taking on Anderson the Spider Silva. And Matt, Anderson Silva started out his pro MMA career before you were even born. Wow. He kicked it off in 97. You popped out in 98. And I was born in 94 for full transparency. But Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. I mean,
you said I popped out.
We have a couple. Mom, if you're watching, we're sorry. We have a couple of really talented middleweights in this fight. And Matt, the sky seemed to be the limit for Uriah Hall. Coming off of the Ultimate Fighter, he was putting on classic highlight reel knockouts. And I mean, to really cap off and to really focus on Uriah Hall's biggest win, he is a win over former Bellator middleweight champion and Dream champion Gegard Mousasi. How insane is that? Now, The rematch did not go as well for Uriah Hall, but he looked amazing in that first fight. And for Uriah Hall, out of his last two really big wins. Now, the Bevon Lewis fight, he was losing the first 2 rounds handily. And then he came back and went, you know what, Bevon? You don't deserve this win. And finished the hell out of poor Bevon Lewis. And then if you look at his last fight, a really big split decision win over shoeface Antonio Carlos Jr. For Anderson Silva, 1-4 in his last 5. And that one, Matt, very controversial. If you go over to MMA decisions, there are few votes and few MMA media members that thought that Anderson Silva actually won that fight.
So, and for full transparency, I actually thought Anderson won. I thought he won the first 2 rounds. I know that's not a popular opinion, but I don't think it was that Anderson Silva looked all that great against Derek Brunson. I actually think Derek Brunson looked good against Anderson Silva. I don't think Uriah Hall will have a similar issue. Today, I really think you have to emphasize UFC 200 on, because I'm going to say that's the Anderson Silva that we're talking about today. He's no longer the Spider. That man's dead. That died when Chris Weidman checked a leg kick. I think Anderson Silva, as of late, are there positives to his game? Yes, there are. The Adesanya fight's a good example of if Anderson Silva is at range fighting a striker similar to himself who is sort of low volume and will, you know, play some of that trickery. Anderson Silva, basketball IQ-wise, I do think is still at a level where, like LeBron James, he's older, his body can't do the same things, but he's figured out, okay, if I just pass the ball a lot, I don't need to be this crazy athlete. Anderson Silva, he's relying more on his MMA fight IQ than he is on this, oh, I'm this crazy fast twitch guy. And yes, when you're Anderson Silva, when you have reached those heights of, Anderson Silva's one of what, the top 5 greatest fighters of all time? I don't think that's a very controversial thing to say. He had the longest title reign up until Demetrius Johnson broke it, and he was finishing people in crazy fashion. He's 45 years old now, though, and there's only so much you can expect. Anderson Silva's takedown defense, is it good? Yeah, it's really good. He's also 45. Is his striking good? It's phenomenal. He has the reflexes of a 45-year-old, though. And Uriah Hall, he's been inconsistent in his career. I do think that's really been the epitome of his career. But the last few performances, I think we've seen a lot of positives. And even in his last loss against Paulo Costa, I think there's a lot of benefits to take away from it.
I got to focus in on that fight because the UFC's doing Uriah Hall dirty. If you go to UFC stats, it doesn't show a knockdown for Uriah Hall against Paulo Costa. Tosses that uppercut in close. Costa tap the knee, get back up. But did they touch? I don't know. But Uriah Hall definitely did have flashes of brilliance in that fight. And that's the thing. You get like lightning in a bottle only for a second in the majority of Uriah Hall's fights. And like you said, with Anderson Silva, to throw out a baseball reference, not a basketball reference, it's like if you could mix in a little bit of Jamie Moyer, because he's throwing an 80-mile-an-hour fastball.
At least I'm picking players people know.
And you know it's coming. Jamie, you know it's coming. But at the same time, he's going to toss in an 83-mile-an-hour changeup, and it's going to have a little bit of break, and you're not going to see that coming. He's like baseball's Jamie Moyer. He's like basketball's Jose Calderon. Because you know those slick passes are still coming your way. But, oh, by the way, he could throw a three-pointer. No, for Anderson Silva, he has been competitive. And that's the thing. Out of those losses, he's still been competitive. Other than the Jared Cannonier fight where, again, checking leg kicks, not Anderson Silva's strong suit. And if you start to chop at his knees, oh boy, you might find some success. So for Uriah Hall, he's such a dynamic striker, too. I don't think he gets enough credit. You look at the highlight reel stuff.
You don't think Uriah Hall gets credit for being dynamic?
I don't think he does. I really don't think he does. I mean, I think it's a bit of a surprise that Uriah Hall has a main event in 2020. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. But good job of matchmaking, because you have a guy that's a human highlight reel in Uriah Hall, good for good or for bad, and you have 45-year-old Anderson Silva that's still getting it done. He's not getting the wins, but he's still getting it done. So it is overall a tough one because you have a greatest of all time against the greatest that never was.
Yeah, and Uriah Hall, the direct comparison of him when he was leaving The Ultimate Fighter was, damn, like if he beats Kelvin Gastelum in the finals, Anderson Silva's going to be the only guy who he can match him up with. Like that's the level of hype that was around Uriah Hall at one point. And I know a lot of people are down on him and they do underrate his skills because he never lived up to the hype that was once given to him. But when the hype is you're going to be Anderson Silva one day, it's pretty hard to live up to that. And Hall, I do think, has done a good job. One X factor, because I bring this stuff up a lot. The weight cut to 185 is awful for Uriah Hall. It's something I always worry about. When Jeremy Stevens fought Josh Emmett, Uriah Hall was supposed to fight Vitor Belfort's co-main event, which would have been just an absolute massacre and probably would have put Uriah Hall in a highlight reel forever, even though he's already in a few. But yeah, due to weight cutting, was not medically cleared, fainted, had a lot of issues. Since then, it does seem like he's been able to kind of fix up his diet and whatnot, but that's always something I worry about with Hall fighting at 185, just something I thought I'd mention. Anderson Silva's boxing, even at this stage in his career, is still quite good. He is good at getting on the inside. He's got that really nice jab and he can switch stances. The leg kicks are an interesting point because Jose Aldo's a guy who used to throw a ton of leg kicks, and that was always the story of his career. He's the best kicker ever, even though really he just primarily throws leg kicks. After he has sustained knee injuries, though, and foot injuries, we do see it less and less from Aldo. And I do think Anderson Silva, since, he did have that terrible injury, it's not take anything away from him. If I snap my leg, I'm sure I'd be hesitant to throw the technique that had done it in the first place. But we do see Anderson Silva much less likely to check leg kicks, doesn't really throw them nearly as much. He'll still slap them out there, don't get me wrong, still a part of his game. But you can tell he's not as committed to the overall technique as he used to be. And I do think that's just been an accumulation of damage throughout his career. I don't think the leg kicks are going to be the way to go against Uriah Hall. This is going to be one of the weird fights where Anderson Silva might shoot for a takedown because Uriah Hall he's at the point that Anderson was about 6 years ago, and he's not at the same ceiling that Anderson was, but you just have to think athletically what he's able to do. He's still able to throw crazy techniques. And again, Uriah Hall, we're not talking about a prospect fighting this, old legend anymore. Uriah Hall's been around for a minute now. I mean, 15-9, the record's deceiving because he has always had to fight those top level of competitions. People forget, Uriah Hall's a win over Thiago Santos at 185, which doesn't really go as noticed, but it's a pretty big win. I think Uriah Hall's probably going to win by knockout. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. You look at Anderson Silva. Does he have a good chin? Yes, he does. Does he have good striking defense? Yes, he does. There's nothing that makes me smile harder watching an MMA fight than when Anderson Silva just starts swatting at invisible bees in front of his face. It's always great because, as an opponent, I don't know about you, but I would be just so confused if a man in front of me started flailing his arms around and I'm like, oh, sure, I guess I'll try striking at this. I think the craftiness of Anderson Silva can get him success, maybe even win him a round. But we've been saying this for years, is that, Anderson Silva is still kind of crafty. You can be kind of crafty at 39. At 41, I might say you're still crafty because I want to hold on to what was the greatness of Anderson Silva. But at 45, I don't think I can lie to myself anymore. It's not you, Anderson. It's me. And I'm going to have to start picking Uriah Hall in this one.
Matt, I don't know how I can follow that one up. I just have to say, again, Uriah Hall carries his power. He's the more dynamic striker to this point. He also trains at Fortis MMA, which is one of the better gyms to be training at this point in time. I mean, you look at the guys that you can train with. Ryan Span's a perfect guy to train with, especially for a fight like this. Really long, really rangy. Saif Saud really puts in good work, especially in the corner. And hey, the gym's partially owned, it's a tiny little bit, by Deron Williams, former NBA point guard. So you got that too. But overall,
Utah Jazz fans.
I think that this is a good fight. I'm fine with the matchmaking. I worry about Anderson Silva because he said this is his last fight.
I hope.
But it's his last UFC fight. But it's his last fight. So maybe he does a Legends tour and it ends up like Fedor fighting Fabrizio Verdun.
He fights Fedor at like a New Year's Eve show in Verizon.
Yeah, or with Bellator. The cross promotion of the two. But overall, if we have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt, 852 of them, 77% going with Uriah Hall. 46% of the voters saying he's going to win by decision. 47% saying he's going to win by knockout. If you look at Uriah Hall, in terms of the odds, open to minus 180. Early money came in on him, then a little bit on Silva. Now Hall at a minus 225 for Anderson Silva, opened at a plus 155. He's now at a plus 181. I can't say anything that you didn't. I think a lot of people are going to be in agreement. I'm sure there's going to be people out there that think that Anderson Silva turns back the clock and puts on a performance he did against Damian Maia.
Yeah, I'm going to be telling myself that right up until Friday, too. You're not in the minority. I want Anderson Silva to be great. It's not like I'm a hater.
That fight against Damian Maia was in Abu Dhabi, so there is that. Anderson Silva's got, again, to say it and to use a cliche, he's got lightning in a bottle in Abu Dhabi, so maybe he can dial that back. It's just a shame that we have two real legends of the sport retiring week after week with Khabib last weekend.
Sure.
Hopefully that ends, but probably not. And Anderson Silva, it's got to be it. I mean, at 45 years old, you know. So I'm going with Uriah Hall in this one. I think that that's the way to go. We're going prime time like the Cigarellos. You're going with...
I'm also going with Uriah Hall. Again, you have a guy who's younger, but can do all the things that the older guy can. He just has youth on his side in this. So Uriah Hall, probably by a super violent finish. Again, that's not what I'm hoping for. I really hope Anderson Silva goes out there. They have a back and forth war, and like Uriah Hall wins a split decision where it's like, okay, now you go on and do great things.
I wish this was 3 rounds.
Not happening. That's a good point, too. No, Uriah Hall's going to probably do something really violent, and we're all going to be really sad Saturday night. That's how it's going.
Matt, both of us going with primetime Uriah Hall at a Fortis MMA in Texas. And I'm really looking forward to this card. We got a lot of under-the-radar fights, so make sure you check out the rest of the playlist. Hang on with the boys at Fight Night Picks, because you're not going to want to miss question mark kicks on Saturday. We get the chance to recap our picks. If weigh-ins affected anything, hey, you're worried about Uriah Hall's weigh-in? Maybe we can chat about it. So tune in with us, question mark kicks Saturday night. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say,
let's get into it.